so many questions. Why is the world spinning? Why is the moon keeping its orbit? Can rockets fly backwards? The facts you didn't know you needed. The Useless Show.
Here's something that'll mess with you the next time you eat corn on the cob. An ear of corn almost always has an even number of rows, most commonly 16. Not 15, not 17, even. Every single time. Nature did the math before we did. That's either deeply satisfying or deeply unsettling depending on your relationship with numbers. Sloths are already famous for being slow at everything. But here's one area where they're quietly elite, holding their breath. They can actually hold it longer than dolphins by slowing their heart rate down to a third of its normal speed. A dolphin, one of the most athletic animals in the ocean, is losing a breath holding contest to a creature that takes 2 weeks to digest a single leaf. Incredible. That cinnamon you've been sprinkling on your oatmeal your whole life? There's a decent chance it's not actually cinnamon. Real cinnamon and the cheaper cassia version sold in most grocery stores come from two completely different trees. Most stores sell cassia and just call it cinnamon because most people don't know the difference. You've been living a mild lie and nobody told you. Pistachios are called the smiling nut in Iran and the happy nut in China, both because the shell naturally splits open into a little grin. A nut so good-natured, it looks like it's smiling at you before you eat it. Even the food is in a better mood than most people on a Monday morning. You've probably eaten pound cake before and never once thought about the name. The original recipe was literally 1 pound each of butter, sugar, flour, and eggs. That was the entire formula. No secret technique, no creative twist, just a baker in the 1700s making a cake with the simplest math possible. And somehow, it still works. Some hospitals still keep jars of live leeches on hand. Leech therapy is FDA approved to help restore blood flow after delicate surgeries like reattaching fingers or ears. A creature straight out of the Middle Ages is still doing legitimate medical work in modern operating rooms. Before you cringe, they have a better track record than a lot of treatments that sound much fancier. Platypus already has a lot going on. It's a mammal that lays eggs, has a duckbill, a beaver tail, and venom. But here's one more thing to add to the list. It has absolutely no stomach. None. Food goes straight from its throat into its intestines, skipping the whole step. The platypus just decided the stomach was optional, and somehow it's doing just fine. Evolution clearly had a weird day when it got to the platypus. Goldfish can see more colors than humans can, including ultraviolet light that is totally invisible to us. The fish you won at a carnival fair has more advanced color vision than you do. That little orange creature in the bowl is experiencing a richer, more colorful world than you've ever seen. Let that sink in. Pistachios are delicious, but stack too many of them together in one place and they become a fire hazard. If stored in large enough quantities, they can spontaneously catch fire because of their high fat content and low moisture. There are shipping containers in the world that have burst into flames purely because of too many pistachios. A snack with a dark side. Respect the nut. Pop rocks feel like tiny explosions in your mouth because they literally are. The candy is manufactured with tiny pockets of pressurized carbon dioxide trapped inside each piece. And when they dissolve on your tongue, the gas escapes in rapid little bursts. That's the whole trick. One clever bit of food engineering from the 1970s turned pressurized gas into one of the most memorable candy experiences ever made. Your heart takes up more space than most people realize, enough that your left lung had to make room for it. Your left lung is noticeably smaller than your right, specifically to leave space for your heart sitting to the left side of your chest. Your own body is asymmetrical on the inside, and you've just been living with it. Everything about the human body is a compromise. A blue moon is a phrase everyone uses, but the moon is almost never actually blue. Almost never. But here's when it genuinely has been. When volcanic ash gets into the atmosphere, it scatters certain wavelengths of light and can turn the moon a real shade of blue. The phrase usually means rare, and the actual phenomenon is rarer still. The moon goes blue, and almost no one is watching when it does. Iceland is literally getting bigger. The entire island sits on a split between two tectonic plates that are slowly pulling apart, which means Iceland grows about 2 centimeters wider every single year. In geological terms, that's actually fast. Iceland is expanding, and if you come back in a few million years, it'll be a noticeably different island. The land itself has ambition. You have about 1.5 million sweat glands spread across your skin. 1.5 million. And some of the densest patches aren't in your armpits like you'd expect. They're on the soles of your feet. Your feet are sweating right now, quietly, through the bottom of your shoes. You're welcome for that mental image. There's a forest in Poland where hundreds of pine trees have a sharp 90-degree bend right at the base before growing straight up. Nobody knows exactly why. The leading theory is they were deliberately shaped by humans during World War II for use in curved furniture construction, then abandoned when the war broke out. But that's never been confirmed. A whole forest of bent trees, and the explanation is still just a theory. If you're enjoying these facts so far, hit that like button. It really helps. Now let's keep going, because it only gets weirder. In 2021, a diver off the coast of Massachusetts was briefly scooped up inside the mouth of a humpback whale. A full-grown adult human inside a whale's mouth. The whale spat him out unharmed after a few seconds, but those few seconds must have been the longest of his entire life. He survived with the most unbelievable story at any dinner party for the rest of his life. And the whale just swam off like nothing happened. Tomatoes don't look that complicated. Red, round, mildly controversial on the fruit or vegetable question. But genetically, they're doing more than you'd think. Tomatoes have roughly 7,000 more genes than humans do. A tomato is more genetically complex than a human being. If a tomato could talk, it would have a lot more to say than you. Earwax sounds gross, but it's actually a specialized form of sweat. Your ear canal is lined with glands that produce it the same way your regular sweat glands work, just with a different output. So when someone says they're sweating, there's a technically accurate version of that happening in their ears too. The human body is endlessly creative. NASA has a plane called the Vomiting Comet. That's its real nickname. It creates weightlessness for astronaut training by flying in dramatic steep dives that produce about 25 seconds of zero gravity at a time. During the steep climb that follows, the G-forces hit hard. Hence the name. NASA needed a way to train people for space on Earth, and they built a plane that makes everyone nauseous. Honeybees flap their wings about 200 times per second. That's exactly what creates the buzzing sound, the wing frequency vibrating the air. The buzz isn't a bee making noise on purpose. The buzz is a bee moving so fast it's playing a musical note with its own wings. 200 beats per second, constantly, while navigating, communicating, and finding flowers. Bees are working harder than any of us. In 2016, a man fell into an acidic, boiling hot spring at Yellowstone and was almost entirely dissolved by the time rescuers could reach him. The water is so hot and so chemically aggressive it breaks down human tissue extremely quickly. Yellowstone is one of the most beautiful places in America and one of the most quietly dangerous. The gorgeous colors in those pools come from microbes living in conditions that would destroy most living things. Nature is stunning and terrifying in equal measure. Your body produces faint visible light, not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech, but literally. Human bodies emit a tiny amount of light all the time. The catch is it's about 1,000 times too dim for the human eye to detect. You are technically glowing right now, and nobody can tell. Every person you've ever met has been quietly luminous this whole time. The scent of a footprint doesn't just linger for dogs. They can smell the difference in age between two sets of footprints and tell which one is older. Your footprints leave a timeline in the ground that another animal can read just by sniffing the sand. You've been leaving scent data trails your entire life and had no idea. Dogs know things about where you've been that you've already forgotten. Ever wonder why your fingers go wrinkly in the bath? It's not just waterlogging, it's intentional. Your skin wrinkles in water to create better grip, the same way tire treads help cars hold the road. Your nervous system triggers it on purpose. Your fingertips are smarter than you give them credit for, automatically upgrading your traction underwater. Your body improves itself in the bathtub. There's a planet called WASP-76 where it rains iron. Not metaphorically, actual molten iron droplets fall from the sky on its night side. During the day, temperatures get so extreme that iron vaporizes completely. On the cooler night side, that vapor condenses and falls as rain. Liquid metal falling from the sky every night on another planet. Earth's weather seems extremely manageable by comparison. Brazil nuts are incredibly nutritious, but there's a fine print. Eating just a few of them can already push you past your daily recommended amount of selenium, and eating a large handful regularly could cause selenium toxicity. The world's healthiest nut comes with a warning label. Too much of a genuinely good thing is still too much. The red color in a lot of candies, yogurts, and juices doesn't come from berries or artificial dye. It comes from crushed cochineal insects. Tiny bugs are harvested, dried, and processed to produce a red pigment called carmine. It's natural, it's FDA approved, and it's been in your food your entire life. Before you swear off red candy forever, just know your body has processed thousands of them already, and you're fine. Wombats look like fat, sleepy potatoes that couldn't outrun anything. Completely wrong. These animals can hit 25 miles per hour in short bursts, fast enough to leave a human behind. A wombat can sprint away from you before you've even registered what you're looking at. Never underestimate the chunky ones. True for wombats. True in life generally. Jupiter is so massive, it could fit over 1,300 Earths inside it. But despite that size, it spins faster than any other planet and completes a full rotation in under 10 hours. Jupiter has the shortest day in the solar system. The biggest planet moves the fastest. You'd barely have time to eat breakfast before the day was over on Jupiter. Namibia has a stretch of coastline called the Skeleton Coast, and the name earns every syllable. It's littered with shipwrecks and bleached whale bones that have washed ashore for centuries. Deadly fog rolls in from cold ocean currents with almost no warning, disorienting ships until it's too late. Sailors used to call it the land God made in anger. It's one of the most hauntingly beautiful and most quietly deadly places on Earth. Right now, a blood cell inside your body is completing a full loop around your entire circulatory system in about 60 seconds. 1 minute. Heart to lungs to extremities and back again. Your blood is running a marathon every single minute of your life without ever being asked. And it never stops, not once, for as long as you're alive. That deserves some respect. Carbonated drinks weren't invented to be fun or refreshing. They were invented to imitate mineral spring water, which people in the 1700s believed had powerful health benefits. The fizz was the medicine. Nobody was trying to create a party drink. They were trying to replicate a health spa in a bottle. And then somewhere along the way it became cola. Progress is unpredictable. Saturn's moon Iapetus looks like it can't make up its mind. One hemisphere is as bright as fresh snow. The other is as dark as coal. The contrast is so extreme, it looks like someone painted exactly half of it. Scientists believe one side collects dark material sweeping through space, while the other stays icy and reflective. A moon that is literally two completely different worlds depending on which side you're looking at. Carrots, apples, and onions all taste sweeter after a frost, not because the cold makes them better by coincidence, but because when temperatures drop, the plant converts its stored starches into sugar as a survival mechanism to prevent freezing. You're not just eating a vegetable. You're tasting a plant's survival response. Cold weather produce isn't just fresher. It's fighting back, and the fight tastes sweet. Frogs cannot swallow with their eyes open. They literally need to blink. And when they do, their eyeballs press down into the roof of the mouth and help physically push food down their throat. The eyeballs are part of the swallowing mechanism. A frog blinks to eat. Every time you see a frog blink, something is happening inside its head that you probably didn't want to picture. We think of asteroids as lone rocks tumbling silently through space. But some of them have their own moons, smaller rocks that orbit them as they travel. Mini solar systems inside our solar system, hidden out in the asteroid belt. A rock, orbiting the sun. Its systems all the way down. A group of porcupines is officially called a prickle. Not a herd, not a pack, not a colony, a prickle. Whoever named that was clearly a fan of accuracy. You genuinely cannot think of a better collective noun for a bunch of quill-covered animals that will absolutely stick you if you get too close. Stop refrigerating your tomatoes. Genuinely, it's ruining them. The cold temperature halts the chemical reactions that produce a tomato's flavor. What comes out of the fridge tastes like a vaguely red vegetable that used to have opinions about itself. Room temperature, always. This is not a preference. This is science telling you to change your behavior immediately. Marshmallows didn't start as a campfire snack. The original marshmallow was made from the sap of the actual mallow plant, a real medicinal herb, mixed with honey and eaten by ancient Egyptian royalty as a luxury treat. Pharaohs were eating an early version of the marshmallow. The candy aisle is running a 3,000-year-old royal dessert program, and nobody makes a big deal about it. If you're still watching, drop a comment below. Let me know you're one of the real ones. Now let's keep going. Carrots can technically turn your skin orange if you eat too many of them. It's a real condition called carotenemia, where beta-carotene builds up in your body and starts showing through your skin, mostly on the palms and soles of your feet. It's harmless and fades when you cut back. There's a very real threshold of carrot consumption past, which you begin transforming into a carrot. Nobody knows exactly where that line is for each person, which makes it a personal experiment nobody asked to run. There's a magnetic hill in Canada where if you put your car in neutral, it appears to roll uphill on its own. People make the trip specifically to experience it. The phenomenon is completely real and completely an optical illusion. The surrounding landscape creates such a convincing false sense of slope that your eyes override what physics is actually doing. Your brain is being defeated by a hill. It happens to everyone. Nobody wins. Jupiter is so massive that it and the Sun don't actually orbit each other in the traditional sense. They orbit a shared gravitational balance point called a barycenter, and that point sits just outside the surface of the Sun itself. So Jupiter isn't just a planet orbiting our star. It's a gravitational partner massive enough to pull the Sun slightly off-center. Jupiter is literally tugging on the Sun, and the Sun just goes with it. Madagascar broke away from Africa so long ago that evolution had nearly unlimited time to do its own thing in total isolation. The result, about 90% of Madagascar's wildlife exists absolutely nowhere else on the planet. Lemurs, chameleons, baobab trees, species that developed entirely cut off from the rest of life on Earth. It's not just an island. It's a parallel planet that happened to share the same ocean. A group of hedgehogs is officially called an array. Not a bundle, not a cluster, an array. The word sounds like it belongs in a math equation, but here it is, describing a small pile of spiky nocturnal mammals. English named animal groups during a specific era of enormous creative confidence, and we should all be grateful for it. Here's one for everyone who feels guilty buying frozen vegetables. Frozen ones are often more nutritious than so-called fresh, because they're frozen within hours of harvest, locking vitamins in at peak freshness. That fresh broccoli that traveled 3 days on a truck before sitting in your store has been slowly losing nutrients the whole time. The freezer aisle was right. You were wrong. And that's completely okay. Chili peppers evolved their heat specifically to stop mammals from eating them. Capsaicin, the compound that makes chilies hot, causes pain in mammals, but is completely harmless to birds. Birds eat the seeds and spread them. Mammals just suffer. The chili designed a targeted defense system to repel one entire category of animal and built an alliance with another. And then humans came along and started breeding them hotter on purpose. We really showed that pepper. Your sense of smell is sharpest in the spring and weakest in the dead of winter. Seasonal changes in humidity and temperature affect how scent molecules travel through the air and how your nasal tissue responds to them. Your nose has a season. It performs better in spring, gets sluggish in winter, and nobody gave it the option to disagree. The Nazca booby chick has a brutal start to life. It's common for the older chick to physically shove its younger sibling out of the nest to die, and the parents let it happen. They don't intervene. They don't stop it. This is a standard feature of Nazca booby family life, not a rare exception. Nature doesn't enforce sibling kindness. It just watches. Twinkies have a legendary reputation for lasting forever. The reality is far less impressive. Their actual shelf life is about 45 days. The myth of the immortal Twinkie is entirely made up, spread by pop culture until everyone assumed it was true. A Twinkie expires faster than some shampoos. The most famous junk food in history has been lying about its longevity the whole time. Stick around, because the best facts are still coming. And if you haven't hit that like button yet, now would be a great time. Most people have heard of Uluru, Australia's famous red rock rising out of the desert. But Mount Augustus, also in Australia, is more than twice the size, and almost nobody talks about it. It's the world's largest single rock, and it's just sitting there in the Australian outback being completely underrated. Fame is not proportional to size. The most impressive rock on Earth is not the famous one. That smell of freshly cut grass that most people love, that's the grass screaming. It's a chemical distress signal the plant releases when it's being wounded, meant to alert nearby organisms. The pleasant summery scent that people find so relaxing is a plant's active distress call broadcasting damage across the lawn. We've collectively decided the smell of suffering is great. Humans are something else. The little dent between your nose and upper lip is called the philtrum. It has a name. Scientists aren't entirely sure what it does. There's no widely agreed upon function. It forms during fetal development as two sides of the face fuse together, and the groove is simply left behind. There is a feature on every human face that medicine has named, studied, and still cannot fully explain. Your body has mysteries built right into it. A group of zebras is called a dazzle. That name isn't random. Their stripes create genuine visual confusion that makes it extremely difficult for predators to lock onto a single animal when the herd moves together. What looks decorative is actually a full tactical defense system. Zebras are wearing camouflage that only works in a crowd. The group itself is the strategy. Licorice seems harmless enough, but eating too much black licorice can actually raise your blood pressure and interfere with your heart rhythm. The compound that gives it its flavor, glycyrrhizin, affects the hormones that regulate potassium levels in your body. The FDA has issued real warnings about it. An old-fashioned candy is capable of causing cardiac problems if you take it seriously enough. Even licorice has a dark side. On Saturn's moon Titan, the atmosphere is so thick and the gravity so low that a human could strap on wings and fly just by flapping their arms. Not figuratively. Scientists have actually modeled this. The physics work. Titan is the one place in the known solar system where human-powered winged flight is theoretically achievable. We found the perfect location for the greatest activity ever invented, and it's 750 million miles away. The bubbles in every carbonated drink you've ever had are carbon dioxide, the exact same gas your lungs are constantly trying to expel. Manufacturers dissolve it into liquid under pressure, and when you open the can, the pressure drops and the gas escapes as bubbles. Every fizzy drink you've ever enjoyed is full of your exhaled gas in a slightly different form. You're essentially drinking a bottled version of your own breath. You're welcome. Chewing gum is the second most common type of litter in the entire world, right behind cigarette butts. More gum ends up stuck to sidewalks, pressed into pavement, and glued under tables every year than almost any other form of trash. It's also one of the hardest types of litter to remove. The world's second biggest litter problem fits in the palm of your hand. Small habits, enormous consequences. Your funny bone isn't a bone at all. It's the ulnar nerve, running right along the outside of your elbow. And when you hit it, you're not striking bone. You're compressing the nerve directly against the surface with almost no padding protecting it. That sharp tingling zap is a nerve being struck. It's called the funny bone because of the humerus, the actual bone it runs along. A pun became a permanent anatomical nickname, and it's been confusing people ever since. There's a sandstone formation in Arizona called the Wave that looks like it was rendered by a computer and is almost too perfect to be real. The swirling, flowing rock was carved by wind and water over millions of years. It's so fragile that only 64 people are allowed to visit it per day, and permits are awarded by lottery. One of the most stunning natural formations on Earth, and access to it is literally a raffle. The hole in a donut reportedly exists for a practical engineering reason. It makes the middle cook through evenly, so the dough doesn't stay raw in the center while the outside burns. Before the hole, donuts were dense lumps that cooked unevenly. One simple geometric change solved the problem entirely. The most recognizable feature of the world's most beloved fried food was originally just an engineering fix. Sometimes the solution is simply removing something. Mount Thor in Canada has the tallest vertical drop on Earth, a sheer cliff that falls over 4,000 feet straight down. Not a slope, not a gradual incline, a vertical wall of rock dropping more than 3/4 of a mile. It's named after a Norse god of thunder, which is exactly the right name for something that terrifying. Canada is hiding an extreme landscape, and its reputation for being polite is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Asparagus makes some people's urine smell distinctly strange, but here's the real twist. Not everyone can actually detect it. The ability to smell the specific sulfuric compound asparagus produces requires a certain genetic trait, and a significant percentage of people simply don't have it. Some people eat asparagus, notice nothing unusual, and assume the whole story is a myth. It's not. They just can't smell it. Lucky them, or unlucky them, depends entirely on how you look at it. Earth has a sort of unofficial second moon, an asteroid called Kruthny that traces a strange horseshoe-shaped path around our planet. It's not a true moon in the traditional sense, but it's been loosely circling Earth for thousands of years and will continue to do so for thousands more. A rock that's been quietly following our planet this entire time, and we barely acknowledge it. Kruthny deserves better. The Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland is made of about 40,000 interlocking hexagonal columns of volcanic rock, stretching out into the sea like a natural cobblestone road built by giants. Local legend says exactly that. A giant built it as a path to Scotland. The scientific explanation is just as astonishing. Ancient lava cooling so uniformly it cracked itself into perfect hexagons. Whether it was a giant or geology, the result is the same. Raindrops are not shaped like teardrops. That classic cartoon shape is completely wrong. As a raindrop falls, air resistance flattens it from the bottom until it looks more like a tiny hamburger bun. Small drops stay round, large ones flatten out. The shape you've been picturing your entire life every time someone says raindrop doesn't actually exist in real rain. Reality is doing something entirely different, and nobody corrected you until now. Some of the world's finest cheeses are aged inside caves for months or even years. The specific combination of temperature, humidity, and natural molds living in cave walls creates flavor profiles that can't be replicated in a warehouse. The cheese is literally eating the cave environment and converting it into taste. Every bite of a cave-aged cheese contains an entire ecosystem. Fancy cheese is geography you can eat. We're deep into it now. If you haven't liked the video yet, do it right now. Let's keep the facts coming. There's a lake in Australia's outback called Katie Thanda Lake Air that is usually bone dry. It only fills with water a few times per century when massive rainfall events redirect rivers into the basin. When it does fill, something extraordinary happens. Enormous flocks of birds appear within days, seemingly out of nowhere. Millions of birds at a lake that barely exists. Nature keeps tabs on places nobody's visited in decades. Saturn's rings look solid from a distance, but they're made of countless individual chunks of ice, ranging in size from dust particles to pieces as large as houses. They're not a disk, they're a crowd. Trillions of icy fragments independently orbiting Saturn, just close enough together to appear as a single structure. If you could see Saturn's rings at the scale of a single particle, they'd look less like a ring and more like a traffic jam in space. The closest star to our Sun is Proxima Centauri, and it's over 4 light years away. That means light, traveling at 186,000 miles per second, takes more than 4 years to get there. The fastest spacecraft humans have ever built would take roughly 70,000 years to reach it. The nearest possible neighbor in the cosmic neighborhood is still incomprehensibly far away. Space isn't just big, it's almost insultingly empty. There are tiny mites living in your eyelashes and pores right now. Demodex mites, microscopic, 8-legged relatives of spiders, spend their entire lives on human skin and are found on virtually every adult on Earth. They eat dead skin cells. They come out at night. They've been here the whole time, and you've never once noticed. You are a habitat for an ecosystem that never asked your permission. Sleep tight. On Mars, there are sand dunes shaped almost exactly like the Starfleet logo from Star Trek, the same chevron symbol that's been on the uniforms since the 1960s. By pure coincidence. The angle of the wind, the slope of the terrain, and the way the dunes interact created a pattern indistinguishable from a science fiction franchise's emblem. Space accidentally referenced a show about space. Nobody planned that. The chewy black pearls at the bottom of bubble tea are made from tapioca, which is extracted from the root of the cassava plant, the same plant behind tapioca pudding. A tropical root vegetable is quietly behind one of the most popular drink trends of the last 30 years. The cassava plant has been feeding people for thousands of years and then became a global beverage phenomenon without anyone really making a fuss about it. Plitvice Lakes in Croatia is one of the most photographed places in the world, a series of turquoise lakes connected by cascading waterfalls. But what most photos don't show is that the lakes are constantly reshaping themselves. Minerals in the water deposit as travertine rock, slowly building natural dams and redirecting the flow. The landscape looks the same year to year, but it's technically never the same twice. Plitvice is a living thing that can't stop sculpting itself. A group of kangaroos is called a mob. Not a herd, not a troop, a mob. It has exactly the kind of energy you'd expect from a group of animals that can kick hard enough to cause serious injury. The name fits perfectly. Australia named its animal groups with appropriate intensity. Coconut water is so chemically similar to human blood plasma that it has been used as an emergency intravenous fluid in remote field hospitals when proper IV supplies ran out. The electrolyte balance is close enough to work in a real medical crisis. A liquid inside a fruit, hanging from a tree, doubles as a blood plasma substitute. Nature put an emergency medical supply inside every coconut and wrapped it in a hard shell. Off the coast of Alabama, under the waters of the Gulf of Mexico, there is an ancient cypress forest, a grove of trees submerged and preserved for over 60,000 years under the sediment, exposed again when Hurricane Ivan shifted the seafloor in 2004. Trees alive before modern humans spread across the globe, perfectly intact under the ocean. The Gulf of Mexico was hiding a prehistoric forest for 60,000 years, and it took a hurricane to reveal it. The satisfying crunch of biting into a fresh apple isn't just texture. It's millions of tiny cells inside the fruit rupturing simultaneously and releasing their juice as you bite through them. Every crunch is a small structural collapse happening at the cellular level. An apple is designed by nature to deliver juice by exploding from the inside the moment you bite it. The snack is engineered to be satisfying. Evolution understood mouthfeel. Right now, without feeling any of it, you are hurtling through space at over 1,000,000 miles per hour. The entire Milky Way is being pulled in one direction by the gravity of distant galaxy clusters, and everything in it, including you, your house, and the planet you're sitting on, is along for the ride. You are moving faster than any human technology has ever traveled, constantly, without noticing. Stillness is an illusion. Blue giant stars are some of the most luminous and dramatic objects in the universe, thousands of times brighter than our sun. But they burn so intensely, they exhaust their fuel in just a few million years. Our sun will live about 10 billion years. A blue giant might last 1 million. The brightest stars have the shortest lives. The universe's most spectacular performers always have the quickest exits. When your stomach growls, it's not actually your stomach asking for food. It's your intestines. The muscles lining your digestive tract squeeze and contract rhythmically to push things through. And when there's nothing solid in there, the sound of air and fluid being pushed around is what you hear. The rumbling of an empty stomach is technically coming from somewhere further down the line, and it happens whether you're hungry or not. Your gut is just doing its job loudly. There's a galaxy officially called the Sombrero Galaxy, named by actual astronomers, because its bright central bulge surrounded by a dark ring of dust makes it look exactly like a Mexican hat floating in space. It's about 28 million light-years away. Scientists named an entire galaxy after a piece of headwear and moved on with their careers. Astronomical naming conventions are criminally underappreciated. A single strawberry's flavor isn't produced by one compound or two. It's built from more than 350 different aroma compounds working together. Remove any significant portion of them and the strawberry tastes wrong in a way that's hard to pinpoint. Every time you eat one, your nose and brain are processing a symphony of over 350 chemical notes simultaneously. The simple fruit on your kitchen counter is the most compositionally complex flavor your mouth probably encounters on a regular basis. Mars has a canyon so enormous, it makes the Grand Canyon look like a crack in a sidewalk. Valles Marineris stretches so far across the Martian surface that if it were on Earth, it would span the entire country from coast to coast. It's 10 times longer and 3 times deeper than the Grand Canyon. The largest geological feature we know of on any rocky planet is sitting on our neighbor, waiting for someone to go stand at the edge. Your body starts digesting food before you even swallow it. Saliva contains enzymes, specifically amylase, that begin breaking down starches the moment food enters your mouth. By the time you swallow, digestion has already started. Your mouth is not just a chewing machine. It's also a chemistry lab running the moment food touches your tongue, whether you're paying attention or not. Only real ones are still here. Comment fact gang right now. Let's keep going. A large oak tree can drop tens of thousands of acorns in a single good year. Tens of thousands. But only a tiny handful will ever grow into trees. Most get eaten, rot, or land somewhere they can't survive. An oak tree plays the odds by producing an overwhelming number of seeds and accepting that the vast majority won't make it. Quantity over quality on a massive scale. And it's been working for millions of years. The pop of a popcorn kernel is a tiny steam explosion. Each kernel has a small amount of water trapped inside a hard starch shell. When the temperature gets high enough that water turns to steam rapidly, the pressure builds, and the shell bursts outward, flipping the starch inside out. The white fluffy part of popcorn is the inside of the kernel turned completely outward. Popcorn is a kernel that explodes into its own interior, and we eat it by the bucket. Along Ireland's coastline, wave-cut rock platforms reveal something extraordinary. Stone layers folded into massive zigzag shapes by ancient tectonic forces from hundreds of millions of years ago. What looks like patterned rock is a record of pressure so powerful they bent solid stone as if it were clay. The Irish coast is an open geology textbook, And every step you take on, it walks across hundreds of millions of years of planetary history. A group of rhinos is called a crash. Not a herd, not a pack, a crash. Given that a rhinoceros can weigh over a ton in charge at 30 miles per hour, this is the most accurate collective noun in the animal kingdom. Someone looked at a group of rhinos and decided the appropriate word was crash. That person was completely right, and we should thank them. Pears are one of the few fruits that actually ripen better off the tree than on it. If left to ripen on the branch, the center turns soft and grainy before the outside is ready. So pears are deliberately picked firm and allowed to finish ripening in storage or at home. The pear you buy at the store isn't fully ready on purpose. Waiting is baked into the experience of eating a pear. Patience is literally part of the recipe. At birth, the strongest and most developed sense a newborn has isn't sight or hearing, it's touch. Touch develops in the womb before any other sense, beginning around 8 weeks of gestation. A newborn can feel everything but can't yet focus its eyes or process language. The first thing you ever understood about the world wasn't what you could see or hear. It was what you could feel. We all started by reaching out. The Murrieta Islands in Mexico hide a beach that you can only reach by swimming through an underwater tunnel at low tide. Inside, completely hidden from the open sea, there's a perfect sheltered beach enclosed by cliffs, open only to the sky above. It's called the Hidden Beach, which is the least creative possible name for one of the most magical places on Earth. But it earned it by being genuinely, literally hidden. A group of otters floating together in the water is called a raft. Otters hold each other's paws while sleeping, so they don't drift apart, a behavior called rafting. A whole cluster of them, linked together, floating on the open water, asleep. A raft of otters. It is one of the most sincerely wholesome facts in the entire animal kingdom, and it deserved its own sentence. The cells in your eyes that let you see in the dark, rod cells, can take up to 30 minutes to fully adjust after being in a bright environment. That's why walking into a dark room leaves you almost completely blind for a while. Your night vision is powerful, but it has a warm-up period that evolution never got around to shortening. Your eyes need half an hour to activate night mode, worth knowing before you go stargazing. The vestibular system in your inner ear tells your brain which way is up, what's moving, and how to stay balanced. When it's disrupted by an ear infection, a blow to the head, or certain medications, the entire world starts spinning uncontrollably because your brain is receiving false information about gravity. Your ability to stand, walk, and function without falling is maintained by a tiny fluid-filled system inside your skull that you've never had to consciously think about. Until something goes wrong. Your body has around 600 muscles. And according to research, it takes more of them to frown than to smile. Whether the precise numbers are disputed or not, the core finding holds. Smiling activates fewer muscles and requires less physical effort than frowning. Your face is being more efficient every time you smile. Your body is already trying to tell you something through pure muscle mechanics. In central Vietnam, there are 5 marble and limestone hills called the Marble Mountains, each named after one of the 5 natural elements. Carved inside them are caves, tunnels, and ancient Buddhist and Hindu shrines that have existed for centuries. From the outside, they look like scenic hills. Walk inside, and you're standing in a cave with altars built by ancient hands, lit by rays of light falling through natural openings in the rock above. Vietnam is hiding cathedrals inside mountains. Ripe bananas emit ethylene gas, the same compound that triggers ripening in most fruit. That's why putting a ripe banana next to other fruit speeds up their ripening. And it's why one rotten banana in the bunch spreads damage so fast. One bad apple spoils the bunch applies even more accurately to bananas. They're broadcasting a ripening signal that everything nearby has to listen to. The janky Dangsha landforms in China look like someone painted an entire mountain range with a watercolor set and forgot to tone it down. Stripes of vivid red, orange, yellow, green, and blue run through the rock in horizontal layers, created by different minerals depositing over millions of years. It's a real landscape that looks more like a background in an animated movie than anything that should exist on Earth. China is hiding rainbow mountains, and they're completely natural. Cheddar cheese is naturally white. The familiar orange color has nothing to do with how cheddar is made. It comes from annatto, a plant-based dye added during production. The orange was introduced centuries ago to standardize appearance and disguise variation in fat content between batches. You've been judging cheddar by a cosmetic decision made in 17th century England. The color is entirely optional. The flavor never was. You have actual metal in your blood. Hemoglobin, the molecule in red blood cells that carries oxygen, has iron at its core. That iron is what allows it to bind to oxygen and transport it through your body. When blood comes into contact with air, that iron oxidizes, which is part of what you're detecting when you smell it. You are, at a biochemical level, partly made of metal. Embrace it. Snow isn't white. The ice crystals in snow are actually clear and colorless. The white appearance comes from the way millions of tiny crystals scatter all wavelengths of light equally all directions, the same physics that makes seafoam look white. Take a single snowflake and it's transparent. Take trillions of them together and they become the color of everything at once. Snow is white because there's too much of it to see through. A group of giraffes is called a tower, which makes complete sense when you consider that a giraffe already stands over 18 feet tall, and a group of them towers above the landscape in a way nothing else on Earth matches. Whoever named them wasn't being poetic. They were just looking up and describing what they saw. Sometimes the right name is simply the obvious one. Subscribe now if you haven't already. You don't want to miss what's coming next. A polar bear can smell a seal from over 20 miles away through several feet of solid ice and snow. It can detect a seal's breathing hole from a distance most humans can't even see clearly. The polar bear's nose is doing something no technology humans carried for most of our history could replicate. It is tracking prey through a frozen landscape using pure chemistry. Nature built a heat-seeking missile and put it on a white bear in the Arctic. Your eyes send your brain images that are upside down. The lens of your eye focuses light onto the retina in an inverted orientation, so the raw visual data your brain receives is literally flipped. Your brain corrects this automatically before you're ever consciously aware of it, presenting the world right side up. You have never seen the world the way your eyes actually receive it. Everything you've ever looked at has been processed and flipped before becoming a thought. A group of frogs is called an army, which is absolutely correct, and they have the numbers to justify it. A single pond during breeding season can hold thousands of frogs. An army of frogs. If they ever organized, we would have to take it seriously. Fortunately, they haven't. So far. Your sense of taste is significantly dulled at altitude. When you're in a plane cruising at 35,000 feet, the low cabin pressure and dry air reduce your ability to detect salt and sweetness by up to 30%. That's a major reason airline food seems bland. It's not that the food is necessarily bad. It's that your taste buds are operating at reduced capacity and not telling you about it. You've been unfairly judging airline catering your whole life. Some of the blame belongs to physics. In Romania, there's a cave called Muval that has been completely sealed from the outside world for over 5 million years. Inside, there's a unique ecosystem sustained entirely by chemosynthetic bacteria instead of sunlight, spiders, water scorpions, and leeches that exist nowhere else on Earth, adapted over millions of years in total isolation. Whatever lives in Muval Cave has never seen light, and it's thriving. The hottest part of a chili pepper isn't the seeds, it's the white pith that the seeds are attached to. That pale, spongy inner membrane is where the highest concentration of capsaicin is found. The seeds absorb some heat from contact with the pith, but they're not the source. Everyone who carefully removes seeds to reduce the heat is missing the more important step. The white part is the real danger. Now, you know. The thinnest skin on your entire body is on your eyelids, thin enough to be nearly translucent. The thickest is on the soles of your feet, designed to absorb constant pressure and friction. Your body calibrated the thickness of every patch of skin for its specific job. A one-size-fits-all approach would have given you eyelids that couldn't close or feet that couldn't feel the ground. Your skin is a precision-engineered material made from a single substance. Cacao beans, the source of all chocolate, were so valuable to the ancient Aztecs that they used them as currency. You could buy a turkey for 100 beans. You could pay for a night's lodging with a handful. The Aztecs were literally using chocolate as money. And we look back at that as a quaint historical curiosity while spending real money on chocolate at the grocery store. The Aztecs were onto something the whole time. Your blinking rate changes with your emotional state. When you're nervous or anxious, you blink more frequently. When you're deeply concentrating, your blink rate slows dramatically. Poker players and interrogators have read blink rate as an emotional signal for decades. Your eyes are broadcasting your internal state whether you know it or not. Next time someone tells you to keep a poker face, they might also want to mention your blinking. A lot of apples in grocery stores are coated in a thin layer of edible wax before they hit the shelves. It's food-grade wax applied to replace the fruit's own protective coating that gets removed during processing, and it slows moisture loss while maintaining that polished shine. The gleaming apple in the produce section isn't naturally gleaming. It's been prepared for you. Even the apple is wearing something for the occasion. On the Oregon coast, there's a hole in the basalt rock at the ocean's edge called Thor's Well, and at high tide, it appears to swallow the entire ocean. Waves surge in and drain dramatically downward through the opening, creating the visual effect of an endless drain consuming the sea. The Pacific Ocean appears to be going down a drain the size of a hot tub. Oregon is casually hosting one of the most dramatic natural spectacles on the entire West Coast. Inside Alaska's Mendenhall Glacier, carved by meltwater over thousands of years, there are ice caves that glow electric blue from within. The color isn't a reflection. Dense glacial ice absorbs every wavelength of light except blue, which passes through. Stand inside one, and you're surrounded by a phenomenon that produces its own color from pure physics. Blue light from compressed ancient ice in a cave that took thousands of years to form. Eating beets can turn your urine pink or red, sometimes vividly so. The condition is called bichuria, and it happens because certain people can't fully break down the red pigment during digestion, so it passes through. It's completely harmless. It's also the kind of thing that happens the morning after, long after you've forgotten you ate beets, and causes a moment of genuine alarm before the memory returns. Beets set a delayed trap that works on almost everyone. The crunch sound you hear eating chips isn't only from the chip. A significant portion is amplified inside your own skull. The vibration travels through your jaw directly to your inner ear, making food sound louder to you than to anyone nearby. You are listening to your food through bone conduction. This is why eating in a quiet room sounds so loud to the person eating, and no one else hears it quite the same way. Your skull is your personal sound system for snacking. Beluga whales have the most varied vocal range of any animal in the ocean. They produce clicks, squeals, chirps, whistles, and can even mimic the sounds of other animals. Arctic sailors heard them through the wooden hulls of their boats and called them the canaries of the sea, a whale that sounded like a bird, performing through the wall of a ship for an audience that had no idea what it was hearing. Belugas were putting on shows before anyone came to watch. The Quetzal bird was considered so sacred by the ancient Maya that killing one was punishable by death. Its iridescent tail feathers, which can exceed a meter in length, were reserved exclusively for royal headdresses. You couldn't own one, couldn't harm one, and couldn't wear its feathers unless you were royalty, a bird with better legal protection than most people of its era. The Quetzal had its own criminal code and everyone knew it. Male gharials, a critically endangered Indian crocodilian, develop a large hollow growth on the tip of their snout called a gara that amplifies vocalizations and blows bubbles during mating season. It only appears on fully mature males. A reptile with a built-in amplifier that grows directly on its nose, specifically to impress females. The animal kingdom never stops finding new solutions to the same problem. Spinner dolphins got their name because they literally leap out of the ocean and spin, up to 7 full rotations on their axis before splashing back down. Scientists still debate why they do it. The leading theories range from communication to parasite removal to pure play. A dolphin might be spinning in the air for the same reason you do a cartwheel, because it can, and it feels good. We may never know for certain, and somehow that makes it more delightful. We're getting close to the end, but the facts are only getting better. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Honeypot ants have a solution, food storage, that is deeply unsettling and surprisingly efficient. They designate certain workers as living storage vessels. These ants hang from the ceilings of underground chambers, with their abdomens swollen to the size of a grape with stored nectar. When the colony is hungry, they drink directly from these living tanks. There are ants whose entire job description is to be a suspended, full jar of food. Nature did not have to do it this way. It did anyway. The harpy eagle has talons as large as grizzly bear claws. It flies through the rainforest canopy at up to 80 kilometers per hour and plucks monkeys, sloths, and large iguanas directly from the trees. A bird. Snatching monkeys out of the canopy at 80 kilometers per hour with grizzly-sized talons. If you were a monkey in the Amazon and saw a shadow cross the canopy, the outcome was likely already decided. Baby wood ducks are born inside tree cavities, sometimes up to 15 meters above the ground. Within 24 hours of hatching, before they can fly, the mother calls from below and the chicks jump. A newborn duck, less than a day old, leaping from a 5-story equivalent height to terrain it has never seen. Their light bodies and fluffy feathers cushion the landing, and they walk to water on their own afterward. Baby ducks take a 5-story leap on day 1 and consider it routine. Wallace's flying frog of Borneo has feet so oversized and fully webbed they function as parachutes. It stretches all 4 limbs out and glides up to 15 meters between rainforest trees, making controlled descents through the canopy. A frog that doesn't fall, it glides. It navigates the forest using its own feet as wings. Evolution kept stretching those toes wider until the problem of getting between trees was solved entirely. The Waldorf salad was invented in 1893 at the Waldorf Hotel in New York by a maitre d' named Oscar Cherky. The original recipe had just 3 ingredients: apples, celery, and mayonnaise. No walnuts. Those were added years later. One of the most famous salads in the world was created by a single person at a hotel with almost nothing in it and somehow survived 130 years of culinary evolution. The simplest versions tend to last the longest. Our entire galaxy, and every other galaxy in our local group, is being pulled at 600 kilometers per second towards something called the Great Attractor. A massive gravitational anomaly so powerful it's distorting the movement of galaxies across hundreds of millions of light years. And here's what makes it stranger. It sits directly behind the plane of our own Milky Way, which blocks our view of it, making it extremely difficult to study. Something unimaginably massive is pulling the universe in one direction, and we can barely see what it is. The darkest known planet in the observable universe is called Tree S2b, and it reflects less than 1% of the light that hits it. Less than coal, less than black paint, less than virtually any natural material on Earth. A planet so dark, it's almost invisible in space. We found it only because it periodically blocks the light of its host star. The gelatin in gummy bears, marshmallows, and Jell-O is made by boiling animal hides, bones, and connective tissue to extract collagen, which solidifies when cooled into that familiar springy, clear gel. Every time you bite into a gummy bear, you're eating processed collagen from an animal's connective tissue. Before you lose your appetite forever, This process has been feeding people in various forms for centuries. You've eaten thousands of them already, and you're fine. The Jackson's chameleon looks like a miniature triceratops, 3 real horns on its face, used in duels with rival males. But unlike most animal fights, these duels are conducted in slow motion. 2 chameleons press against each other's horns on a branch until one is pushed backward off the perch. A horn-based jousting tournament conducted at the pace of a chess match in a tree, between animals the size of your hand. Nature has strange arenas. In the Namib Desert, the ground temperature can reach 70 degrees Celsius, hot enough to cook an egg. The shovel-snouted lizard lives on the sand and manages the heat through a behavior called the thermal dance. It lifts alternating pairs of feet and holds each one in the air before shifting, reducing contact with the burning ground at all times. A tiny lizard doing a deliberate, rhythmic dance to avoid being cooked alive. Survival in the desert looks like choreography. The glass frog of Central and South America has a completely transparent underside. You can watch its heart beating through its skin. You can see its digestive system working in real time. Some species are so clear they become nearly invisible from below when resting on a sunlit leaf. A frog you can see through, its organs visible and operational through its own body wall. The glass frog has nothing to hide. Literally. If you're loving these facts, drop a comment and tell us your favorite one. In 1960, the World Health Organization parachuted 14,000 live cats into Borneo on purpose. The island had been sprayed with DDT to control malaria, which killed mosquitoes but also wiped out cats, which caused a rat explosion, which threatened a plague. So WHO airdropped cats from aircraft to restore the ecological balance. Operation Cat Drop, the solution to a solution's unintended consequences, was raining cats from the sky. Problem solving sometimes loops around to something truly extraordinary. The empty quarter of the Arabian Peninsula, called Rub al Khali, is the largest continuous sand desert on Earth, covering 650,000 square kilometers. That's larger than the entire country of France. Parts of it had never been reached by any outsider until the 1930s. An area the size of France, made entirely of sand, unexplored within living memory. The world still had blank spaces on the map barely 90 years ago. Uranus wasn't discovered by someone searching for planets. William Herschel was cataloging faint stars in 1781 when he noticed one that moved, changing position across multiple nights. He reported it as a comet. It wasn't until further analysis confirmed it was too large and too slow that it was reclassified as a planet. The 7th planet in our solar system was discovered by accident by someone who thought he was looking at something else entirely. Some of the greatest discoveries start with "that's weird." The pavlova, the elegant merengue dessert, is at the center of one of history's most delicious diplomatic disputes. Both Australia and New Zealand claim to have invented it in the 1920s, honoring visiting Russian ballerina Anna Pavlova. Neither has produced conclusive evidence. Food historians have spent decades on this. The 2 most polite countries in the Pacific are in an unresolved feud over a merengue, and neither side will back down. Let them have it. The Emperor Tamarin, a small Amazon monkey, is named after Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm II because its magnificent white mustache closely resembled the emperor's famous facial hair. The biologists who named it found the resemblance too obvious to ignore. A monkey in the Amazon is immortalized as a living tribute to a German emperor's mustache. Taxonomy has excellent comedic timing and no regrets. When Apollo astronauts returned from the moon, lunar dust tracked in on their suits had never been exposed to oxygen or moisture. When it finally contacted air inside the capsule, it smelled strongly of gunpowder, caused by unsaturated lunar minerals oxidizing for the very first time. Astronauts became the first humans to smell the moon, and it smelled like the inside of a gun. Space has a scent. It's not what you'd expect. The lumpsucker fish has pelvic fins fused together into a powerful suction disc on its underside. It can grip rocks in powerful ocean currents so firmly that the rock moves before the fish does. A small, round, almost cartoonishly designed fish is essentially glued to the seafloor by its own belly. Whoever designed the lump sucker clearly prioritized not being swept away over everything else, and it got exactly what it was built for. Mars's smallest moon, Deimos, orbits so slowly that from the Martian surface it takes 30 hours to travel across the sky. A future astronaut on Mars could theoretically jog westward and keep pace with it indefinitely. You could outrun a moon. Not here, but on Mars. At a jogging pace, you could stay under the same moon forever. That's the kind of detail that makes you want to go. The Scotch egg, a hard-boiled egg wrapped in sausage meat, breaded and fried, was allegedly invented at London's Fortnum and Mason in 1738 as a portable meal for travelers on long carriage journeys, a convenience food created for 18th century road trips. The Scotch egg is a 286-year-old travel snack that became a staple of British pub culture, cricket matches, and picnics. Some foods travel well in more ways than one. The island of Dominica in the Caribbean has a permanently boiling lake, a flooded volcanic vent where water around the edges approaches 92 degrees Celsius. The center is hidden beneath rising clouds of vapor and has never been approached. No one knows the depth or the temperature at the middle. A lake that is actively boiling on a Caribbean island, and its center is still unexplored. Even paradise has places no one's been. The world's officially narrowest street is in Reutlingen, Germany. Sproer Hofstrasse is just 31 centimeters wide at its narrowest point, less than the width of most people's shoulders. You have to turn sideways to pass through it. There is an officially recognized, publicly accessible street on Earth narrower than a human body. Germany measured it, documented it, and gave it official street status. That level of commitment to thoroughness is very on brand. The rainbow boa of South America doesn't get its iridescence from color pigment at all. Its scales have microscopic ridges that refract light like tiny prisms, splitting it into a holographic rainbow shimmer across its entire body. The snake itself is essentially colorless. It catches light in a way that produces every color simultaneously, with zero pigment involved. A snake that creates its own rainbow from pure physics. The most beautiful light show in the Amazon is coming off a reptile. We're almost at the end. Make sure you've subscribed and drop a comment to let us know you made it this far. The Cat's Eye Nebula is one of the most photographed objects in deep space. But what most images don't show is that it has 11 concentric shells surrounding it. Each one was produced when the dying star at its center expelled a layer of gas in a periodic pulse over thousands of years. 11 separate events, each leaving a visible ring we can still detect. A star that died slowly, and every stage of its dying left a record written in light. The bobtail squid carries colonies of bioluminescent bacteria inside a belly light organ and uses them to cancel out its own shadow from moonlight above. The bacteria glow at precisely the right brightness to match ambient surface light, making the squid invisible to predators looking up from below. A squid farming bacteria inside its own body, using them as a shadow-canceling cloaking device. The bobtail squid invented stealth technology before humans had a word for physics. The black swallower fish can consume prey more than twice its own length and 10 times its own body weight. Its stomach expands so dramatically that the outline of consumed prey is sometimes visible through its transparent skin. A fish eating something the size of a full person relative to itself, and you can see the silhouette of what's inside. The black swallower is deep-sea nightmare fuel wrapped in a surprisingly small package. The box jellyfish has 24 eyes, of 4 completely different types, including advanced image-forming eyes structurally similar to vertebrate eyes, capable of detecting color, shape, and direction. 24 eyes on an animal with no centralized brain to consciously process what any of them are seeing. The box jellyfish is a visual powerhouse with no mind to appreciate it. It sees more than most animals and understands none of it, and still hunts successfully. The animal kingdom's most mysterious achievement. The Antarctic Circumpolar Current flows around the bottom of the world and carries roughly 150 times the volume of all Earth's rivers combined. It's the primary driver of global ocean circulation, connecting and mixing the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. Without it, the planet's ocean chemistry and climate would be unrecognizable. An unassuming loop of water around a frozen continent is what keeps all the oceans on Earth alive and moving. The Amazon River Basin may contain approximately 390 billion individual trees from 16,000 different species, more tree diversity in one basin than across all of Europe and North America combined. And scientists are still formally identifying and naming new species every year. The Amazon is so biologically complex that humanity's total knowledge of it is still incomplete. A forest so vast that science hasn't finished reading it yet. The Greenland ice sheet is so heavy it has pressed the bedrock beneath it down by nearly 1 kilometer. If all that ice melted, the land would slowly rebound upward over thousands of years, a process called glacial isostatic adjustment already measurably happening along some coastlines. The ground beneath Greenland is being held down by ice that has sat on it for over 100,000 years. Remove the weight, and Greenland would slowly rise from the sea. The continent breathes on geological timescales. In 1960, when Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh became the first humans to reach the deepest point in the ocean, the Challenger Deep, nearly 11 kilometers below the surface, they expected barren rock under crushing pressure and absolute darkness. Instead, they found a flatfish resting calmly on the seafloor. A fish! At the bottom of the world, just sitting there. The deepest point ever reached by humans already had a resident, and it didn't seem impressed. The Gobi Desert is growing. At approximately 3,600 square kilometers per year, driven by overgrazing, drought, and desertification, it is advancing southward toward Beijing, producing dust storms that darken the sky over cities hundreds of kilometers away. A desert is expanding toward a capital city, and the timeline is measurable in human lifetimes. One of the great environmental stories of our era is a desert quietly getting bigger year by year and not asking permission. You cannot cultivate Brazil nut trees on a plantation, not because of climate or soil, but because their entire pollination chain depends on an unbroken sequence of ecological dependencies. They need specific orchid bees. Those bees need specific orchids to reproduce. Those orchids need specific fungi. Those fungi need old-growth rainforest. Remove any single link, and the whole chain breaks. Every Brazil nut you've ever eaten came from a wild tree in an intact forest, pollinated by a bee that required an orchid to exist. Some things can only be allowed to survive. They cannot be manufactured. The leatherback sea turtle can grow over 2 meters long and weigh nearly 900 kilograms, the largest turtle on Earth, and it crosses the entire Pacific Ocean. From nesting beaches in Indonesia to feeding grounds off California and back. A round trip of up to 20,000 kilometers, completed repeatedly over its lifetime. An animal the size of a small car navigating the world's largest ocean by pure instinct. The leatherback's daily commute is the width of the Pacific. The manchineel tree has been called the world's most dangerous tree, and it earns that title. Standing under it during rain causes blistering, because water carries its sap across exposed skin. Eating its fruit can be fatal. Burning its wood releases smoke that causes temporary blindness. Everything about this tree causes harm in some way if you interact with it. The manchineel doesn't care if you're curious. It enforces a very clear boundary aggressively. Finland has approximately 3.3 million saunas for a population of 5.5 million people, close to 1 per household. They're in offices, apartment blocks, and in the parliament building itself. Finland doesn't treat the sauna as a luxury, it's infrastructure. A cultural institution built into the architecture of daily life at every level of society. Finland decided that sweating together was essential to civilization and then built the country accordingly. Casu marzu is a traditional Sardinian cheese, and it contains live maggots, on purpose. Cheese fly larvae are introduced deliberately to break down the fat into a very soft, runny texture considered a delicacy. The maggots are alive when you eat it. Authorities have attempted to ban it. It remains protected under traditional food designation. A cheese that requires you to consume active insects along with it has successfully defended its legal status for decades. Casu marzu is not going anywhere, and it seems very confident about that. In Western Australia's Kimberley region, there is exposed rock that has been above sea level for 3.5 billion years, essentially unchanged since early in Earth's formation. You can stand on the planet's original surface. Not a recreation of it, not a fossil impression, the actual primordial crust of Earth, exposed, walkable, and as old as the planet itself. The oldest landscape most people will never visit is sitting in the Australian outback, waiting. The princess tree, or Paulownia, is the world's fastest-growing hardwood, capable of adding up to 4 meters of height in a single year. Scientists are actively studying it for rapid carbon sequestration because it pulls CO from the atmosphere at extraordinary rates while growing. A tree that grows 4 meters a year produces high-quality timber and sequesters carbon faster than almost anything else. It sounds too good to be true, and it's completely real and already growing in dozens of countries. Harlequin shrimp are tiny, vividly colored, and completely ruthless. They hunt starfish up to 5 times their own size by flipping them onto their backs and eating them alive over the course of days, while keeping them immobilized but alive specifically to preserve the freshness of the meal. A small shrimp hunting something 5 times larger, flipping it over, and consuming it in slow installments for food quality control. The Harlequin shrimp approaches meal management with a methodology that is both impressive and deeply unsettling. Elephants are the only land mammals that instinctively follow the direction a human points without any prior training. Great apes, our closest relatives, don't do this naturally. Domesticated dogs do, but only after generations of living alongside humans. Elephants understand the gesture on the first encounter with someone they've never met. What that says about elephant intelligence and their relationship with human communication is something researchers are still working to fully understand. Lake Superior is so large that it could supply 30 centimeters of water over the entire land area of both North and South America combined. Its 82,103 square kilometers of surface area makes it the world's largest freshwater lake by area. And it sits quietly at the top of a continent, cold and immense, the largest unfrozen freshwater surface on the planet hiding in plain sight. Lake Superior contains multitudes. Specifically, enough water for the rest of the Americas to bathe in. The most powerful waterfall on Earth isn't Niagara. It's Inga Falls on the Congo River in Central Africa, which carries approximately 30 times the volume of water over its drops than Niagara does. 30 times. It's the largest waterfall by water volume on the planet. And most people have never heard of it because it sits deep in remote rainforest with no famous viewpoint, no tourist platform, and no postcard view. The mightiest waterfall on Earth is waiting in the Congo Basin for someone to come see it. Glass is technically a solid, but its molecules are arranged randomly like a liquid rather than in the ordered crystal structure of most solid materials. The popular myth that old windows are thicker at the bottom because glass slowly flows over time is completely false. Old glass is thicker at the bottom because glassmakers of earlier centuries couldn't produce perfectly uniform panes, so installers placed the thicker edge at the base for stability. Glass doesn't flow. The myth has been thoroughly debunked. Glass 1
Wood is a documented descendant of William Bradford, who arrived in America aboard the Mayflower in 1620 and went on to serve as governor of Plymouth Colony for over 3 decades. Bradford's writings, including his Journal of Plymouth Plantation, remain one of the most important primary sources historians have for understanding the early Pilgrim settlement. Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Delano Roosevelt were 5th cousins, both descending from a common ancestor in the broader Roosevelt family line that settled in New York in the 17th century. Despite the distant relation, their political careers intertwined directly. FDR married Theodore's niece, Eleanor Roosevelt, making the family connection considerably closer through marriage than through bloodline alone. In 1912, after losing the Republican nomination to his former ally William Howard Taft, Theodore Roosevelt founded the Progressive Party to mount an independent presidential run. The party earned the nickname Bull Moose after Roosevelt declared himself fit as a bull moose during the campaign. He ultimately finished second, splitting the Republican vote and effectively handing the election to Woodrow Wilson. John Deere, now globally recognized for its agricultural tractors and equipment, manufactured covered wagons during the 19th century, a period when westward-bound pioneers relied heavily on them for overland travel. The company's origins trace back to 1837, when founder John Deere first developed a steel plow well-suited to breaking through the dense Midwestern prairie soil that wore out standard cast iron plows. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly known as the Mormon Church, maintains dietary guidelines called the Word of Wisdom, which prohibits alcohol, coffee, tea, and other caffeinated beverages in their traditional hot brewed forms. The guidance, recorded in 1833 by founder Joseph Smith, also addresses tobacco use and emphasizes a generally healthful approach to diet and physical well-being among church members. The original rhinestones were small pieces of rock crystal collected from the Rhine River in Europe, prized for their natural sparkle and clarity. They were used decoratively long before synthetic alternatives existed. Modern rhinestones are almost entirely manufactured from glass or acrylic today, but the name persists as a holdover from when the material genuinely came from riverbed deposits along the Rhine. The 4 gemstones classified as precious in modern gemology are emerald, ruby, sapphire, and diamond. Every other gemstone, including amethyst, topaz, garnet, and opal, falls under the broader category of semi-precious stones. This classification system dates back to the 19th century and reflects historical rarity and value rather than any strict chemical or mineralogical distinction recognized universally by modern gemologists. A typical modern electronic device, such as a smartphone or laptop, contains more than 35 different minerals in its construction, including elements like lithium, cobalt, tin, gold, and various rare earth metals. These materials are sourced from mining operations across the globe, and the complexity of modern devices means a single product often depends on an extensive international supply chain just for its raw components. Wind turbine towers stand at an average height of approximately 260 feet, placing them in roughly the same range as some of the world's notable historic structures. For comparison, the Sacré-Cœur Basilica in Paris reaches 273 feet at its highest point. The towering height of modern turbines allows their blades to capture stronger, more consistent wind currents found at higher elevations above ground-level turbulence. Jane Fonda has been married and divorced 3 times throughout her life, with her former husbands including French filmmaker Roger Vadim, political activist Tom Hayden, and media mogul Ted Turner. Her personal life has often paralleled the different chapters of her public career, from her early film work in France to her political activism and later business ventures. Egypt is the only country in the Middle East that is geographically located on the African continent, despite being culturally, politically, and historically grouped with Middle Eastern nations. The Sinai Peninsula, a small portion of Egyptian territory, technically extends into Asia, but the vast majority of the country sits firmly within North Africa, making its regional classification somewhat unique. Condoleezza Rice, who later served as U.S. Secretary of State under President George W. Bush, enrolled at the University of Denver at just 15 years old, an early indication of the academic trajectory that would eventually lead her to become a Stanford professor and provost. She graduated from Denver with a degree in political science before pursuing graduate studies that shaped her career in international relations. Morgan Freeman maintains 26 beehives on his property in Mississippi, a hobby he has spoken about publicly as part of a broader effort to support declining bee populations. He has described beekeeping as a calming pursuit that contrasts with his demanding acting career, and he has used his land specifically to cultivate an environment favorable to pollinators, Early astronaut food during the Mercury and Gemini space programs came in toothpaste-like tubes that could be squeezed directly into the mouth in zero gravity, since conventional eating methods were untested and considered risky. Modern space food has evolved dramatically, now closely resembling standard meals available on Earth, including items like pizza, tacos, and even fresh produce delivered via cargo resupply missions to the International Space Station. The Salvation Army was founded in London in 1865 by Methodist preacher William Booth and his wife Catherine Booth, originally as a mission aimed at providing food, shelter, and religious guidance to London's poor. What began as a local urban ministry has since expanded into a global organization operating in 127 countries, combining religious outreach with extensive humanitarian and disaster relief work. Before his unexpected death in 1997, comedian Chris Farley was the original top choice to voice Shrek in DreamWorks' animated film. Farley had reportedly recorded a significant portion of dialogue before passing away during production. The role was eventually given to Mike Myers, who reworked the character's voice with a Scottish accent partway through development. Departing significantly from Farley's original vocal approach, the Union Pacific Railroad, one of the largest freight railroad networks in North America, operates routes spanning a total of 32,100 miles across the western two-thirds of the United States. Originally chartered in 1862 to help build the first transcontinental railroad, the company has grown over more than a century and a half into a critical part of the country's freight transportation infrastructure. In Kentucky, the legal minimum age to place bets on horse and dog racing is 18, aligning with the state's broader threshold for most forms of legal gambling. Kentucky's deep cultural and economic ties to horse racing, most visibly represented by the Kentucky Derby, make wagering on races a particularly significant part of the state's gambling industry compared to other forms of betting. Keno, the lottery-style gambling game involving number selection and random drawings, was formally introduced into American casinos during the 1930s, primarily through Chinese immigrant communities in the western United States. However, the game's conceptual origins trace back much further to ancient China, where a similar numbers-based game is believed to have been used over 2,000 years ago, reportedly even to help fund construction projects. Australia has the highest rate of gambling participation in the world, with surveys indicating that approximately 80% of the adult population engages in some form of gambling activity. Unlike many countries, Australia does not tax individual gambling winnings, treating them as a matter of luck rather than taxable income. The country's gambling culture is deeply embedded in everyday social life, extending well beyond casinos into pubs and clubs through poker machines. Begonias belong to the order Cucurbitales, placing them in the same broad botanical grouping as melons, squash, and pumpkins, despite looking nothing alike. Plant classification at the order level is based on deeper evolutionary and genetic relationships rather than surface appearance, which is why a delicate ornamental begonia and a sprawling pumpkin vine can share such close taxonomic company. Jelly Roll Morton, widely regarded as one of jazz music's earliest significant composers and pioneers, was a Creole of African, French, and Spanish descent, born in New Orleans in 1890. His mixed heritage placed him within the city's distinct Creole community, a cultural backdrop that heavily influenced the blend of musical traditions he drew on while helping shape early jazz composition and structure. The largest rubber duck ever constructed stands 54 feet tall and is permanently displayed in Buffalo, New York, having taken up residence there in recent years. Giant rubber duck installations have become a recurring novelty in cities around the world, but Buffalo's version holds the distinction of being the largest version of the classic bathtub toy ever built. Before synthetic glitter was developed in the 20th century, people achieved similar shimmering effects using materials like ground mica, crushed hematite, powdered galena, and even the iridescent shells of certain beetles. These natural substances were used decoratively for centuries across various cultures, offering reflective sparkle long before plastic-based glitter became the cheap, mass-produced standard it is today. Olympic weightlifting competitions judge athletes across two specific lifts: the snatch, in which the barbell is lifted from the floor to overhead in a single continuous motion, and the clean and jerk, which involves first lifting the bar to the shoulders before pressing it overhead in a second distinct movement. Competitors are scored on their combined best successful attempt at each lift. In ancient Greece, a foot race called the hoplodromos required competitors to run while wearing a portion of hoplite armor, typically including a helmet and shield, sometimes also greaves. It was exclusively a men's event held at the ancient Olympic Games, and historians believe it was included specifically to test the kind of physical endurance and readiness relevant to actual battlefield conditions. President William Howard Taft threw the first ceremonial first pitch in Major League Baseball history on April 14, 1910, at a Washington Senators game. The tradition has continued with nearly every sitting U.S. president throwing at least one ceremonial pitch during their time in office, making it one of the more enduring intersections between American politics and professional sports. After his defeat in 1814 and subsequent exile to the island of Elba, Napoleon Bonaparte attempted suicide by poison, reportedly using a concoction he had carried with him since the disastrous Russian campaign years earlier. The poison had degraded over time and failed to kill him. He survived the attempt and would later escape Elba entirely, returning to power in France for the period known as the 100 Days. Human nipples are classified into 8 distinct anatomical types based on shape and orientation, including everyday, puffy, flat, inverted, and unclassifiable variations, among others. The classification system is used primarily in medical and dermatological contexts, particularly relevant to breastfeeding guidance and certain cosmetic or reconstructive procedures, where nipple type can influence treatment or feeding approach. Scotland has the highest rate of cocaine use of any country in the world relative to its population, with estimates suggesting roughly 1 in 40 Scots use the drug. Public health researchers have pointed to a combination of factors including drug trafficking routes, socioeconomic conditions, and shifting recreational drug trends across the United Kingdom as contributing causes behind the unusually high national rate spaghetti westerns. The Italian-produced Western films popularized in the 1960s by directors like Sergio Leone are referred to as macaroni westerns in Japan, a regional variation on the same pasta-based nickname. Within Italy itself, the genre is sometimes called Western all'Italiana, meaning Western in the Italian style, reflecting a slightly more formal label than the internationally popular spaghetti nickname. The series finale of MASH, titled Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, aired on February 28, 1983, and drew an audience of over 121 million viewers, making it the most-watched television series finale in American broadcast history. The episode's audience size remained unmatched for decades and reflected the show's deep cultural significance during its 11-season run, depicting the Korean War. In 1999, the National Security Agency banned Furby toys from its facilities, citing concerns that the toys' built-in recording and playback features could potentially capture and inadvertently transmit classified conversations occurring nearby. The decision drew public attention as an unusual example of a children's toy being treated as a genuine information security risk by a major government intelligence agency. While directing the original 1971 film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Mel Stewart frequently withheld details about upcoming scenes from the cast, particularly the children, in order to capture authentic unscripted reactions on camera. This approach was famously used during the boat tunnel scene, where the young actors' visible shock and fear were largely genuine rather than performed. Every volcanic eruption recorded in the contiguous United States over the past 200 years has originated from volcanoes within the Cascade Mountain Range, which stretches from Northern California through Oregon and Washington. Notable eruptions from this range include Mount St. Helens in 1980, which remains the most destructive volcanic event in modern U.S. history in terms of damage and loss of life. The median age of residents in West Virginia is 41 years old, making it one of the oldest state populations in the country. Several factors contribute to this, including outmigration of younger residents seeking employment elsewhere, and a historically slower rate of population growth compared to other states, both of which have gradually shifted the state's overall age distribution upward. Styrofoam is technically a registered trademark owned by the Dow Chemical Company, referring specifically to a type of extruded polystyrene foam used mainly in construction insulation. The disposable coffee cups and food containers, commonly and incorrectly called styrofoam, are actually made from a different material, expanded polystyrene foam, demonstrating how thoroughly a brand name can take over everyday language, despite technical inaccuracy. In the word salmonella, the first letter L is pronounced, despite many English speakers tending to soften or skip it in casual speech. The bacteria's name originates from American veterinary pathologist Daniel Elmer Salmon, who first identified the organism in the late 19th century, and the scientific pronunciation reflects the direct naming convention rather than common colloquial drift. Mad cow disease, formerly known as bovine spongiform encephalopathy, is most likely to be transmitted to humans through consumption of infected brain or spinal cord tissue, where the misfolded prion proteins responsible for the disease are most heavily concentrated. Transmission through muscle meat or dairy products is considered far less likely, since those tissues typically carry significantly lower concentrations of the infectious agent. A group of cats is formally referred to as a clowder, a somewhat obscure collective noun that has fallen out of common usage compared to more familiar animal group terms. English contains numerous similarly unusual collective nouns for animal groups, many dating back centuries to historical hunting and naturalist traditions, with clowder remaining one of the lesser-known examples still occasionally referenced today. Female widow spiders, including the well-known black widow, are known for occasionally consuming the male after mating, a behavior that directly inspired the widow portion of their common name. This phenomenon is formally classified as sexual cannibalism and has been studied extensively by biologists, who note that the behavior, while attention-grabbing, does not occur in every mating encounter across all widow spider species. The first patented garbage disposal unit was called the incinerator, invented by Wisconsin architect John W. Hams in 1927 and patented shortly after. Hams reportedly developed the device to help his wife with kitchen waste management. The company he founded under that same name continues to manufacture garbage disposals today, making it one of the rare cases where a brand name and the original patented invention remain directly connected. Globally, a death by suicide is estimated to occur approximately every 40 seconds, according to data compiled by international health organizations. The statistic reflects suicide as a significant global public health concern affecting populations across virtually every country and demographic. If you or someone you know is struggling, support is available through crisis resources such as the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline in the United States. The Costco location in Lancaster, Pennsylvania maintains a designated parking area specifically for horse-drawn buggies, accommodating the area's significant Amish population who rely on traditional horse and buggy transportation rather than automobiles. The accommodation reflects the store's effort to remain accessible to the deeply rooted Amish and Mennonite communities concentrated throughout Lancaster County. Storyville was the official red light district of New Orleans from 1897 to 1917, established and named after City Councilman Alderman Sidney Story, who proposed legally confining prostitution to a designated area of the city in an effort to regulate and contain it. The district became an unexpectedly significant breeding ground for early jazz musicians, who frequently performed in its bars and brothels. Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and Woodrow Wilson are collectively referred to by historians as the Progressive Presidents, each contributing to the broader Progressive era reform movement spanning the early 20th century. Despite representing different political parties and philosophies, all three pursued reforms targeting corporate monopolies, labor conditions, and government transparency during their respective administrations. Titanium III chloride is a chemical compound notable for its distinctive royal purple color when in solution, used industrially primarily as a catalyst in the production of polypropylene plastics. The compound's striking coloration makes it visually unusual among industrial chemical catalysts, most of which lack any particularly notable visual characteristics outside of specialized laboratory or manufacturing settings. The yellow color, now universally associated with American school buses, was officially standardized in 1939 following a national conference held at Columbia University, led by engineer Frank W. Sire. The specific shade, eventually named National School Bus Glossy Yellow, was selected because of its high visibility in low light conditions and its strong contrast against most natural and urban backgrounds. Paris Hilton's highest completed level of formal education is a GED, which she obtained after attending several different schools during her teenage years, including a period at a behavioral boarding school. Despite her education ending at that level, she has gone on to build an extensive and varied business career spanning fragrance lines, hospitality ventures, music, and television production. O.J. Simpson, the former NFL running back and broadcaster, is the godfather of Kim Kardashian, a relationship rooted in his close friendship with her father, attorney Robert Kardashian, who famously served as part of Simpson's defense team during his 1995 murder trial. The Kardashian family's connection to Simpson predates their reality television fame by decades, tracing back to a genuine personal friendship between the two families. 16 people have intentionally gone over Niagara Falls since the first recorded attempt in 1901, when Annie Edson Taylor became the first to survive the plunge in a wooden barrel. Of those 16 attempts, 11 people have survived. The stunt is illegal under both U.S. and Canadian law, carrying a fine of up to $10,000 for anyone caught attempting it. Women currently make up approximately 24% of jobs across STEM fields in the United States, a figure that varies significantly depending on the specific discipline. Computer science and engineering tend to show particularly low representation, while fields like biology and chemistry are comparatively more balanced. The gap has narrowed gradually over recent decades, but remains a persistent feature of the American STEM workforce. While ice skating as a general recreational activity has roots in British tradition, modern competitive figure skating was largely developed by American skater Jackson Haynes in the mid-19th century. Haynes introduced expressive dance-influenced movement and music into skating, a stark departure from the rigid geometric style favored in Britain at the time, and his techniques eventually became the foundation of the sport practiced internationally today. Before landing his breakout role as Jim Halpert on The Office, John Krasinski worked as an intern for Late Night with Conan O'Brien at NBC. The experience gave him early exposure to television production and the entertainment industry while he was still pursuing acting opportunities. That internship represented a relatively modest starting point before his career launched into one of the most recognizable sitcom roles of the 2000s. Snow Beer, a lager produced and distributed almost exclusively within China, is the best-selling beer brand in the world by volume. Despite minimal international distribution or recognition, the sheer scale of China's domestic beer market allows Snow to consistently outsell globally recognized brands like Budweiser and Heineken, making it a striking example of a massive product that remains largely unknown outside its home market. Under the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, the United States government formally apologized for the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II and authorized reparations payments of $20,000 to each surviving internee or their eligible heirs. The legislation followed years of advocacy from Japanese American communities and acknowledged the internment as a result of wartime hysteria and racial prejudice rather than military necessity. In August 2003, the U.S. detention facility at Guantanamo Bay recorded 23 separate suicide attempts among detainees within a single month, drawing significant international attention to conditions at the facility. The spike in attempts occurred amid ongoing concerns from human rights organizations regarding indefinite detention without trial and the psychological toll on individuals held there during that period. New Zealand became the first self-governing nation to grant women the right to vote in 1893, following sustained activism led by suffragist Kate Shepherd. The Grand Duchy of Finland, then an autonomous region of the Russian Empire, and now the Republic of Finland, went a step further in 1906, becoming the first nation to grant women both voting rights and the right to stand as candidates for parliament. Ocean Avenue holds an unusual dual cultural significance. It's both the title and subject of pop-punk band Yellowcard's 2003 breakout single, and it's the real street in Amityville, New York, where the house featured in the Amityville Horror is located. The overlap is coincidental, though it occasionally creates confusion among fans searching for connections between the unrelated song and the famously haunted property. Caterpillars shed their exoskeleton multiple times as they grow, a process called molting, much like snakes periodically shed their skin to accommodate increased body size. A caterpillar typically molts 4 to 5 times before entering its pupal stage, with each successive skin allowing room for the rapid growth that occurs during the relatively short caterpillar phase of an insect's life cycle. A genuine allergy to water, known medically as aquagenic urticaria, is extraordinarily rare, affecting an estimated 1 in every 23 million people. The condition causes painful hives upon skin contact with water of any temperature, regardless of its source or purity. researchers still don't fully understand the underlying mechanism, and treatment options remain limited for those who have it. The Koch snowflake, first described by Swedish mathematician Held von Koch in 1904, is considered one of the earliest formally described fractal shapes in mathematics. Its initial iteration is constructed from an equilateral triangle with smaller triangles added to each side, producing a six-pointed shape that closely resembles a Star of David before further iterations refine it into the increasingly jagged snowflake pattern. The word barbecue functions across three different grammatical roles in English. As a noun, it refers to the meal, the cooking method, or the equipment itself. As a verb, it describes the act of cooking food that way. As an adjective, it modifies other nouns, as in barbecue sauce or barbecue chicken. Few food-related words demonstrate quite that much grammatical flexibility. The sounds represented by the letters L and R form a minimal pair in phonology, meaning they differ by a single distinctive feature while remaining otherwise similar. Both are alveolar consonants, produced with the tongue near the ridge behind the upper teeth, but L is classified as a lateral consonant, with air flowing around the sides of the tongue, while R is typically classified as a retroflex or approximate consonant in English. Dark brown is the most common color for beer bottles because it offers the strongest protection against ultraviolet light, which can break down hop compounds in beer and produce an unpleasant, skunky odor and flavor. Green and clear glass offer progressively less protection, which is part of why beers bottled in those colors are generally more susceptible to light-related spoilage if left exposed. Whole wheat flour generally absorbs more liquid than white flour due to its higher fiber and bran content, which soaks up moisture during mixing and baking. This difference matters significantly in baking, where recipes calling for whole wheat substitutions often require slightly more liquid or longer resting times to achieve a texture comparable to baked goods made with standard white flour. The first film adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was produced by Thomas Edison's Film Company in 1910, a roughly 15-minute silent film directed by J. Cyril Dawley. The production took considerable creative liberties with the original novel and used innovative practical effects for the era to depict the creature's creation, predating the far more famous 1931 Universal Pictures version by over 2 decades. The Paisley pattern takes its common Western name from the town of Paisley in West Scotland, where the design was extensively manufactured on woven textiles during the 18th and 19th centuries. However, the teardrop-shaped motif itself originated centuries earlier in Persia, where it was known as botte, and the pattern traveled westward through trade routes long before. Scottish weavers adopted and popularized it under a new regional name. Liberia was founded in the early 19th century when the American Colonization Society began resettling freed and formerly enslaved Black Americans along the West African coast, with the first settlers arriving in 1822, decades before the start of the American Civil War. The country's name derives from the Latin word for free, reflecting its founding purpose as a settlement for formerly enslaved individuals seeking autonomy. The terms bureau and dresser both refer to the same general piece of bedroom furniture, a wide chest of drawers typically used for storing clothing. The word bureau is more commonly used in parts of New England and in British English, while dresser is the more widespread term across most of the United States. Though usage varies regionally and the two terms are functionally interchangeable, the Eiffel Tower was constructed as the centerpiece monument for the 1889 Exposition Universelle, held in Paris to commemorate the centennial of the French Revolution. Designed by engineer Gustave Eiffel's firm, the tower opened to the public on March 31, 1889, and was initially criticized by some prominent French artists and intellectuals before eventually becoming the country's most recognizable architectural symbol. Maria Montessori became the first female physician in Italy after graduating from the University of Rome in 1896, breaking significant gender barriers within Italian medical education at the time. Her dissertation, published the following year in 1897, laid early groundwork for the educational philosophy she would later develop, which eventually evolved into the globally recognized Montessori method of child-centered learning. An all-white peacock typically exhibits a genetic condition called leucism, which causes a partial or complete loss of pigmentation in feathers, while still allowing normal eye color and skin pigmentation to remain present in some cases. This differs from albinism, which involves a complete absence of melanin production throughout the entire body, including the eyes, which often appear pink or red as a result. Gelato differs from traditional ice cream in its composition, typically containing less cream and a lower overall fat content, while generally including a higher proportion of sugar relative to its other ingredients. Gelato is also churned at a slower rate than ice cream, incorporating less air into the final product, which contributes to its notably denser, smoother texture and more concentrated flavor. Benito Mussolini was named by his socialist father after Benito Juarez, the 19th century Mexican president known for his liberal reforms and resistance to French intervention in Mexico. The naming reflected his father's own leftist political sympathies at the time of Mussolini's birth in 1883, a notably different ideological inspiration than the fascist politics Mussolini himself would later become infamous for pursuing. The Netherlands became the first country in the world to legalize same-sex marriage, with the law taking effect on April 1, 2001. The first legally married same-sex couples in Dutch history exchanged vows shortly after midnight when the law took effect, marking a significant milestone in LGBTQ rights that numerous other countries would gradually follow over the subsequent 2 decades. Autism spectrum disorder is diagnosed in boys at a rate approximately 4 to 5 times higher than in girls, according to data tracked by health and research organizations. Researchers continue to investigate the underlying reasons for this disparity, with ongoing studies examining whether it reflects genuine biological differences in prevalence, differences in how autism presents across genders, or potential underdiagnosis in girls. King Henry VI holds the distinction of being the youngest person to ascend the English throne, becoming king at just 9 months old in 1422, following the death of his father, Henry V. Given his infancy, the early years of his reign were governed by a council of regents, acting on his behalf until he was old enough to assume direct control of royal authority. Daniel Ford Burnham is most well known for planning and executing the world's Columbian Exposition in 1893, but was also a leading architect for many other famous structures in the United States and the Philippines. The citizens of Falkland Islands celebrate Margaret Thatcher Day every year to celebrate her saving the colony from an Argentinian takeover in 1983. The 1918 influenza pandemic, often called the Spanish flu, infected an estimated 500 million people worldwide, roughly a third of the global population at the time. It received the highest possible rating on the Pandemic Severity Index, reflecting both its extraordinary transmission rate and its devastating mortality, with death toll estimates ranging from 17 to 50 million people globally. Female Tasmanian devils can give birth to as many as 50 pups in a single litter, but their pouch contains only 4 teats, meaning only 4 pups can survive infancy. The newborns themselves are extraordinarily tiny, weighing less than a gram at birth, and the surviving 4 must compete fiercely for one of the limited nursing positions almost immediately after birth. Tasmania was home to the world's first official green political party, founded in 1972 as the United Tasmania Group. The party formed primarily in response to a proposed hydroelectric dam project that threatened to flood Lake Pedder, a significant natural landmark. Though short-lived as an organized party, it laid important groundwork for the global green political movement that followed. John Steinbeck, the celebrated author of The Grapes of Wrath and of Mice and Men, served as a war correspondent for the New York Herald Tribune during World War II, reporting from the European theater in 1943. His wartime dispatches were later compiled into a book titled Once There Was a War, offering a markedly different style from his fiction. Direct observational reporting from the front lines. Upton Sinclair used proceeds from his best-selling 1906 novel The Jungle, which exposed brutal conditions in the American meatpacking industry, to fund a socialist experimental community called Helicon Home Colony in New Jersey. The communal living experiment was destroyed by fire just 1 year after its founding in 1907, ending the project before it could fully establish itself. In Peru, a New Year's Eve tradition involves giving and wearing yellow underwear, believed to bring good luck, prosperity, and love for the coming year. The custom is widely observed across the country, with yellow undergarments becoming a notably popular seasonal item in markets and shops during the final weeks of December as the holiday approaches. The original rubber duck toys, developed in the late 19th century, were designed primarily as solid shoe toys rather than the hollow, squeaking bath toys familiar today. Inventor and sculptor Peter Ganin later patented the now iconic floating bath toy design in 1949, transforming the rubber duck into the bath time staple recognized across generations of children since. PEZ candies were originally created in Austria in 1927 as breath mints marketed toward adult smokers as a tool to help curb cigarette cravings. The name PEZ derives from the German word meaning peppermint, using the first, middle, and last letters of that word. The candy wasn't repositioned toward children, with its now iconic character dispensers, until the 1950s. The first documented reference to a thong in the United States dates to 1939, when New York Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia mandated that nude dancers at the World's Fair wear them as a basic concession to public decency standards. The requirement effectively forced performers into minimal coverage that still technically satisfied the era's indecency laws while allowing the performances to continue. Pilots have informally nicknamed LaGuardia Airport the USS LaGuardia because of its notably short runways and the surrounding waters of Flushing Bay and Rikers Island Channel, which create landing conditions that some compare to touching down on an aircraft carrier. The nickname reflects the precision required to land safely within the airport's limited and tightly bordered footprint. The Continental Congress formally voted to declare independence from Britain on July 2, 1776, a date John Adams believed would become the historic anniversary celebrated by future generations. However, the formal written Declaration of Independence, primarily authored by Thomas Jefferson, wasn't officially adopted until 2 days later on July 4th, the date that ultimately became the recognized national holiday. The earliest barcode patents, filed in the late 1940s by inventors Norman Joseph Woodland and Bernard Silver, described two distinct pattern designs: a linear barcode similar to what's used today, and an unusual bullseye-shaped circular pattern intended to be scannable from any angle. The linear format eventually became the commercial standard, while the bullseye design was largely abandoned. The Picture of Dorian Gray, published in 1890, was Oscar Wilde's only completed novel, despite his extensive body of work across plays, poetry, essays, and short fiction. The novel's exploration of vanity, morality, and hidden corruption generated significant controversy upon release, and it remains the singular full-length prose work in an otherwise diverse and prolific literary career. Coffins and caskets, while often used interchangeably in casual conversation, are technically distinct. A traditional coffin has 6 sides, tapering at the shoulders to follow the rough shape of a human body, while a casket has 4 sides, forming a simple rectangular box. Caskets also typically feature a split lid, allowing for easier viewing of the deceased during a wake or funeral service. A hamper is another term for a basket, traditionally constructed from woven wicker, historically used for storage or transport of laundry, food, or other household items. The word has shifted somewhat in modern usage, now most commonly associated specifically with laundry storage, though its broader historical meaning encompassed a wider range of basket types used across different domestic purposes. The first self-service laundry facility was known as a washateria, a term that originated in the early 20th century and remains in regional use specifically in Texas today. While much of the rest of the United States adopted the more generic term laundromat, certain areas of Texas have retained washateria as the preferred regional name for the same type of coin-operated laundry business. Pope Francis, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Buenos Aires, Argentina, made history in 2013 as both the first Jesuit ever elected pope and the first pontiff to come from the Americas. His selection broke centuries of tradition that had almost exclusively favored European cardinals, and his Jesuit background brought a distinct theological and pastoral to the approach to the papacy. Melania Trump speaks 5 languages: English, French, German, Serbian, and Slovenian, the last of which is her native language from growing up in Slovenia. Her multilingual background reflects both her upbringing in Central Europe and her subsequent international modeling career, which took her through multiple European countries before she eventually settled in the United States. Fairy cakes are the British counterpart to American cupcakes, generally smaller in size and more modestly decorated compared to their often elaborately frosted American equivalent. The term has been used in British baking for well over a century, and while cupcake has become increasingly common in the UK due to American cultural influence, fairy cake remains the traditional regional name. While the Black Death reached its peak devastation across Europe during the mid-14th century, killing an estimated third of the continent's population, Genetic and historical evidence suggests the plague actually originated in Central Asia. Trade routes along the Silk Road are believed to have carried the disease westward, eventually reaching European ports through merchant ships before spreading rapidly inland. Many mainstream commercial toothpaste brands contain sodium lauryl sulfate, the same foaming agent commonly found in shampoos and various other personal care products. The ingredient creates the familiar lathering sensation during brushing, though it serves no actual function in cleaning teeth or fighting cavities. Its role is almost entirely tied to texture and the perceived sensation of cleanliness. According to FDA classification, plain deodorant, which simply masks or reduces odor, is categorized as a cosmetic product, while antiperspirant, which actively reduces sweat production through aluminum-based compounds, is classified as an over-the-counter drug. This distinction means antiperspirants face stricter regulatory requirements regarding active ingredients and efficacy testing than standard deodorants. NASA's astronaut candidate requirements include a minimum of 1,000 hours of logged pilot in command flight time in jet aircraft, along with at least a bachelor's degree in a STEM field such as biology, engineering, physical science, or mathematics. These baseline qualifications are designed to ensure candidates have both the technical education and the hands-on flight experience necessary for the demands of spaceflight. Following the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, the former Soviet space program was effectively split between Russia and Ukraine, resulting in two separate national space agencies. Russia retained the bulk of the program's infrastructure and personnel through Roscosmos, while Ukraine established its own independent space agency, inheriting certain manufacturing facilities and expertise that had been based within its borders. The Great Leap Forward, launched by Mao Zedong in 1958, was an ambitious campaign aimed at rapidly transforming China's agrarian economy into an industrialized socialist society. Its catastrophic failure to meet production goals, compounded by disastrous agricultural policies, directly contributed to the Great Chinese Famine, which is estimated to have caused tens of millions of deaths between 1959 and 1961. When Reggie and the Full Effect released their 2003 album Under the Tray, the physical CD was deliberately placed beneath the plastic tray inside the case, rather than in its standard resting position on top of it. The unconventional packaging choice directly referenced the album's title and required listeners to physically lift the tray to access the disc. Straight edge, a subculture within hardcore punk centered on abstaining from alcohol, drugs, and sometimes casual sex, was most prominently popularized by the Washington, D.C. band Minor Threat in the early 1980s. Their song, Straight Edge, released in 1981, gave the movement its name and helped establish a set of values that spread throughout hardcore punk scenes across the United States and internationally. Standard plastic shopping bags do not begin to meaningfully degrade until approximately 700 years have passed, due to the durability of the polyethylene material they're made from. Even then, the bags don't fully biodegrade in the traditional sense. They break down into smaller microplastic particles that persist in the environment far longer, contributing to long-term ecological concerns surrounding plastic waste. The tradition of decorating Christmas trees traces back to Protestant Christian communities in 16th century Germany, with Martin Luther himself often credited in popular legend with originating the practice after being inspired by stars shining through evergreen branches. The custom spread gradually through Protestant Europe, before eventually becoming a widely adopted secular and religious tradition across denominations and, eventually, much of the world. In Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, the character of Norman Bates was loosely inspired by Ed Jane, a Wisconsin murderer and grave robber whose crimes were discovered in 1957. Jane's disturbing practice of using body parts from exhumed corpses for household items and clothing shocked the nation and went on to influence multiple horror film characters beyond Bates, including figures in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Silence of the Lambs. During the early 20th century, the Sunset Strip's notorious vice industry, including gambling, prostitution, and unlicensed nightclubs, flourished largely because the stretch fell under the jurisdiction of the relatively understaffed Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, rather than the more aggressive and better-resourced LAPD. This jurisdictional quirk allowed illicit businesses to operate with considerably less interference for years. Michigan became the first state in the United States to actively fluoridate its public drinking water, with the city of Grand Rapids beginning the practice in January 1945 as part of a long-term public health study. The initiative aimed to measure fluoride's effect on reducing tooth decay among children, and the results eventually influenced widespread water fluoridation policy across the rest of the country. Snakes lack external ears entirely, but they can still detect sound through vibrations transmitted via their jawbones and skin, which travel directly to the inner ear through bone conduction. This means snakes are highly sensitive to vibrations moving through the ground or nearby surfaces, even though they cannot hear airborne sound the way most other vertebrates do. Melville Dewey created the Dewey Decimal Classification System in 1876, while working as a librarian at Amherst College, developing a numerical method for organizing library materials by subject that remains in widespread use today. He was also a founding member of the American Library Association that same year, helping establish the professional infrastructure that would shape library science as a formal discipline in the United States. The transatlantic slave trade brought enslaved Africans to Latin America and the Caribbean significantly earlier and in far greater numbers than to North America, with Portuguese and Spanish colonizers establishing large-scale slavery in Brazil and the Caribbean beginning in the early 1500s. North American slavery, by contrast, didn't become deeply entrenched until later in the 17th century, decades after the practice was already well established further south. The thin layer of cardboard or paperboard sleeve included with microwavable hot pockets and similar frozen foods is called a susceptor, embedded with a thin metallic coating that absorbs microwave energy and converts it into heat. This allows the sleeve to crisp the food's exterior in ways a standard microwave alone couldn't achieve, mimicking some of the browning effect typically associated with conventional ovens. Traditional chalkboards were originally made from actual slate, a naturally occurring fine-grained rock that provided a smooth, durable writing surface. Modern chalkboards have largely shifted to porcelain-enameled steel, which offers similar writing properties while being significantly lighter, more affordable to manufacture, and more resistant to cracking compared to genuine slate panels. The chalkboard's earliest ancestor was the individual writing slate, a small handheld tablet used by students for personal note-taking and practice, dating back as far as the 11th century. Whiteboards, by contrast, are a remarkably recent invention, not developed until the 1950s, meaning the gap between these two now related classroom tools spans roughly 9 centuries of educational history. The widespread belief that drinking carbonated seltzer water leaches calcium from human bones is a persistent myth without scientific support. Research has shown that plain carbonated water has no significant negative effect on bone density. The confusion likely stems from studies linking cola specifically, not all carbonated beverages, to bone density concerns, primarily due to cola's phosphoric acid and caffeine content rather than carbonation itself. A single standard serving of eggnog contains over 200 calories, largely due to its rich combination of cream, whole milk, sugar, and egg yolks. The traditional holiday beverage is notably calorie-dense compared to most seasonal drinks, and many commercially prepared or homemade recipes incorporating additional ingredients like alcohol or whipped cream toppings can push the calorie count considerably higher per serving. The first motorized police vehicle, built in 1899 in Akron, Ohio, was an electric-powered wagon large enough to transport the city's entire police force at once, which contributed to the eventual nickname Squad Car. The vehicle was destroyed in an accident just 1 year after its construction. But the concept of motorized multi-officer police transport had already begun reshaping how law enforcement approached mobility. Before becoming associated specifically with underwater vessels, the word submarine functioned primarily as an adjective meaning simply underwater, or beneath the sea, used to describe geographic features like submarine canyons or submarine cables long before submersible vehicles existed. The noun usage referring to the vessel itself developed later, as the adjective was gradually repurposed to name the emerging technology. Martha Graham, widely regarded as one of the most influential figures in modern dance, performed as a dancer for 50 years and maintained an active professional career in choreography and direction spanning 75 years overall. Her innovative movement techniques fundamentally reshaped American dance throughout the 20th century, and she continued creating new choreographic works well into her later decades. Jim Gaffigan has built his stand-up comedy career around material widely regarded as clean, meaning it contains minimal profanity and avoids much of the explicit content common in contemporary comedy. This approach has allowed his work to reach a notably broad audience across age groups, and has become a defining characteristic distinguishing his comedic style from many of his contemporaries in the industry. Despite their similar-sounding names, there is no historically direct etymological relationship between Australia and Austria. Australia's name derives from the Latin terra australis, meaning southern land, while Austria's name comes from the Old High German Ostreichi, meaning Eastern Realm. The resemblance between the two country names is essentially coincidental rather than rooted in any shared linguistic origin. The original Sony Walkman, released in 1979, drew its name partly from inspiration tied to the comic book hero Superman, blending the idea of a portable personal device with playful branding sensibilities common in Japanese product naming at the time. The Walkman name eventually became so culturally dominant that it functioned almost as a generic term for portable cassette players throughout the 1980s. The theoretical maximum score achievable in the original arcade version of Pac-Man is 3,333,360 points, a figure determined by the game's programming limitations rather than genuine difficulty. Achieving this so-called perfect game requires eating every dot, fruit, and ghost available across all 256 levels before the game's notorious kill screen glitch occurs, a feat first accomplished by American player Billy Mitchell in 1999. The characters in the BBC children's series Teletubbies were designed with visual elements referencing astronaut spacesuits, reflecting the show's quirky, otherworldly aesthetic. Each character was also given a slightly different skin tone, an intentional design choice meant to subtly represent diversity within the show's simple, colorful cast, despite the characters not representing any specific human ethnicities. The largest recorded number of completed Cat's Cradle pattern changes in a single continuous sequence is 22,700, an achievement that required extraordinary memory, dexterity, and patience given the intricate hand and string manipulation the game demands. Cat's Cradle itself is an ancient string figure game found across numerous cultures worldwide, with this particular record representing an extreme outlier in terms of sustained complexity. Cirque du Soleil first arrived in Las Vegas in 1992 with Nouvelle Experience, marking the beginning of a now extensive presence on the Strip. The company currently maintains 6 active permanent residency shows throughout the city, alongside 3 shows that have since retired from the Las Vegas market, reflecting decades of evolving production and audience demand. Notorious gangster John Dillinger enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1923, reportedly to avoid prosecution following an early run-in with the law, but deserted the service after less than a year, finding military discipline poorly suited to his temperament. That brief naval stint stands in stark contrast to the violent bank-robbing career that would later make him one of America's most notorious Depression-era outlaws. Jack the Ripper remains one of history's most infamous unidentified serial killers, responsible for at least 5 brutal murders in London's Whitechapel district in 1888. Despite over a century of investigation, countless suspect theories, and extensive forensic re-examination using modern techniques, his true identity has never been conclusively established, cementing the case as one of criminology's most enduring mysteries. The Phantom of the Opera holds the record as the longest-running show in Broadway history, having opened in 1988 and run for over 3 decades before its closing in 2023. The next longest-running productions, in order, are Chicago, The Lion King, Cats, and Les Miserables, each representing extraordinary commercial and cultural staying power within the demanding landscape of professional theater. Jane Austen's earliest surviving body of work is collectively known as Juvenilia, a set of short stories, plays, and sketches she wrote between the ages of approximately 11 and 18. The pieces are notably comedic and satirical, offering an early glimpse of the wit and social observation that would later define her published novels, despite being written well before she achieved literary recognition. Epcot, one of the 4 major theme parks at Walt Disney World in Florida, was originally conceived by Walt Disney as a literal experimental city designed to showcase futuristic urban living. The acronym stands for Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow. After Disney's death, the concept evolved away from an actual functioning residential community into the technology and culture-focused theme park that opened in 1982. Cyndi Lauper performed the theme song for Pee-wee's Playhouse, the eccentric children's television series created by Paul Rubens that ran from 1986 to 1990. Lauper's involvement reflected the show's broader tendency to incorporate offbeat, genuinely creative talent from outside traditional children's programming, contributing to the series' distinctive and frequently subversive tone throughout its run. Latin grammar organizes nouns, pronouns, and adjectives into 5 grammatical cases: nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and ablative, each indicating a different grammatical function within a sentence, such as subject possession, indirect object, direct object, or means. This case system allowed Latin word order to remain remarkably flexible compared to languages like English, which rely far more heavily on strict sentence structure. The Pasadena Chalk Festival, first held in 1993 in Pasadena, California, has grown into the largest annual sidewalk chalk art festival in the world, drawing hundreds of professional and amateur artists who transform city sidewalks into elaborate temporary artwork. The event typically spans an entire weekend and attracts large crowds eager to watch chalk masterpieces emerge across the pavement before eventually fading or washing away. Redwood trees have existed on Earth for approximately 240 million years, meaning their evolutionary lineage predates both flowering plants and birds by a significant margin. This places redwoods among the most ancient surviving tree lineages still alive today, having persisted through multiple mass extinction events and dramatic shifts in Earth's climate and ecosystems over hundreds of millions of years. At FabCafe in Japan, customers can order a life-sized replica of themselves rendered entirely in gummy candy for approximately $65, using 3D scanning technology to capture an individual's likeness before producing the edible sculpture. The process blends digital fabrication technology with traditional candy making, resulting in a genuinely unusual novelty item that briefly went viral for its strange but technically impressive execution. Circle of Life, the opening musical number from Disney's The Lion King, begins with vocals sung entirely in Zulu, a Southern African language, before transitioning into the English lyrics most audiences recognize. The Zulu opening was composed by South African singer and composer Lebo M., whose contributions throughout the film's soundtrack helped ground its musical identity in authentic African vocal traditions. In culinary measurement, a dessert spoon is abbreviated as DSTSPN and equates to approximately 2 teaspoons in volume, placing it conveniently between a teaspoon and a tablespoon. While less commonly referenced in American recipes, the dessert spoon remains a standard unit of measure in British and other Commonwealth culinary traditions, particularly in older or traditionally formatted recipes. Thomas Jefferson, the 3rd President of the United States, is credited with inventing the swivel chair, reportedly designing it himself while serving in the Continental Congress so he could rotate easily to observe different parts of the room without standing. He is said to have used a modified version of the chair while drafting portions of the Declaration of Independence, blending his practical inventiveness with his political work. During periods when capoeira was officially banned in late 19th century Brazil, practitioners developed clever evasive tactics to avoid arrest, including quickly shifting from capoeira's combative movements into the rhythms of samba dance whenever police approached. This tactical blending helped capoeiristas disguise their illegal martial art as innocent social dancing, contributing to the deep historical overlap between capoeira and Brazilian musical and dance traditions. Belly dance occupies a dual cultural role throughout the Middle East, functioning both as a formal performance art presented on stage or at professional events, and as an informal social dance commonly performed at celebrations, weddings, and family gatherings. This dual identity means the dance form carries different stylistic expectations and levels of choreographic complexity, depending entirely on its specific social or professional context. Velvet worms possess tiny retractable claws on each of their stubby legs, allowing them to grip surfaces effectively while still being able to move smoothly across flatter terrain. Their distinctive velvety texture comes from rows of microscopic bristles covering their bodies, which serve a sensory function, helping the worm detect vibrations, sound, and chemical or scent cues from its immediate surrounding environment. The earliest precursors to modern celebratory confetti included thrown fruit, nuts, coins, and small mud balls used across various cultures during festivals and processions. Notably, mud and rotten eggs were frequently thrown specifically by lower-class citizens as a deliberate form of mockery directed at passing upper-class nobility, turning what might appear celebratory into a pointed act of social commentary and protest. Dwight D. Eisenhower achieved the rare distinction of becoming a 5-star general and ultimately Supreme Allied Commander during World War II, despite never personally experiencing direct combat throughout his entire military career, including his earlier service during World War I. His exceptional skill instead lay in strategic planning, coordination, and diplomacy among Allied forces, qualities that ultimately proved more consequential than frontline combat experience. The Soviet Union retained official rights to the iconic puzzle video game Tetris, created by Soviet programmer Alexei Pajitnov in 1984, until 1996. Pajitnov did not personally profit significantly from the game's massive global popularity throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, since licensing rights were controlled by the Soviet state during that period, and he only began receiving direct royalties after founding the Tetris company following the rights transition. Bob Ross became famous for his use of the wet-on-wet oil painting technique, a method also employed by celebrated artists including Claude Monet, Rembrandt, and Jean-Honoré Fragonard, each working centuries earlier. The technique involves applying new layers of paint directly onto wet existing layers rather than waiting for them to dry, allowing colors to blend smoothly and enabling the rapid, fluid landscapes Ross became known for on television. MLB legend Barry Bonds' godfather was Willie Mays, himself one of the greatest baseball players in the sport's history. The relationship between the two families ran deep, with Bonds' father, Bobby Bonds, having played alongside Mays during their professional careers, creating a connection that placed Barry Bonds under the mentorship of an established Hall of Famer from a young age. Mercury is commonly known by the alternate name Quicksilver, a reference to its distinctive appearance as the only metal that remains liquid at standard room temperature. The name reflects both its fluid, mobile movement and its silvery, reflective surface, qualities that made it visually striking and somewhat mysterious to those observing it throughout earlier centuries of scientific and alchemical study. Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity, published in 1915 and further developed in subsequent years, mathematically implied the existence of black holes around 1916, though Einstein himself remained skeptical that such extreme objects could actually exist in reality. It wasn't until 1971 that astronomers identified Cygnus X1 as the first strong observational candidate for an actual black hole, confirming decades of theoretical prediction. In the anime and manga series Fullmetal Alchemist, the character Alphonse Elric, whose soul is bound to a suit of armor, is commonly referred to by the nickname Al, which happens to also be the chemical symbol for aluminum on the periodic table. Given the series' deep thematic focus on alchemy and elemental science, the coincidental overlap between the nickname and a real chemical symbol adds a subtle layer of detail for attentive viewers. Academic tenure is built on the principle that granting professors permanent employment protection encourages genuine intellectual freedom, allowing scholars to pursue controversial research, challenge prevailing ideas, and teach without fear of being dismissed for unpopular conclusions. The underlying belief is that this protection ultimately benefits broader society by fostering more honest, rigorous academic inquiry than would otherwise be possible under constant employment insecurity. Native American communities utilize cranberries extensively for multiple purposes beyond simple food consumption, including as a natural dye for textiles and as a component in traditional medicinal remedies believed to treat various ailments. The fruit's versatility made it a valued resource across numerous tribes, particularly in regions of the northeastern United States where cranberry bogs occurred naturally in the landscape. The term pygmy broadly refers to any human ethnic group whose adult population exhibits significantly shorter average stature compared to the global norm, typically defined as adult men averaging under 4 feet 11 inches in height. Historically, the term has been most closely associated with various Central African communities, including groups in the Congo Basin region, though similar short-statured populations exist in parts of Asia and Oceania as well. Modern rolling suitcases with the now standard wheeled, telescoping handle design, originally called rollaboards, weren't invented until 1987 by airline pilot Robert Plath. Plath developed the design specifically to make navigating airports easier for flight crews, and the concept quickly expanded beyond aviation professionals into mainstream consumer travel, fundamentally changing how the general public approach packing and transporting luggage. Przalski's horse is recognized as the last remaining genuinely wild horse species in existence, distinct from feral horses descended from domesticated stock. Native to the steppes of Mongolia and parts of Central Asia, the species faced near extinction in the wild during the 20th century before successful conservation and reintroduction efforts helped reestablish small wild populations across their historic range. You've got enough material to keep people thinking for the rest of the day and enough to impress someone at dinner tonight. If you want more where that came from, hit subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.